They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but what happens when the victim shows up in a Rolls-Royce to his own execution? 10 years ago, Blake Cunningham crowned himself king of mockery, targeting the broken single dad everyone called a loser. Tonight, he's planned the perfect reunion ambush, except the man stepping out of that silver phantom isn't broken anymore. He's holding hands with a billionaire, wearing confidence like armor, and Blake's cruel smile is already cracking. Stay with me until the end and comment your city below. Let's see how far this story of unexpected redemption can travel across the world. The ballroom of the Riverside Grand Hotel glittered with the kind of manufactured nostalgia that only a high school reunion could conjure. Crystal chandeliers threw fractured light across faces that had aged in ways both graceful and cruel, across bodies that had softened or hardened with the passage of a decade. The banner stretched above the entrance read, Lincoln High Class of 2015, 10-year reunion, in gold letters that caught the light like a promise, or perhaps a threat. Blake Cunningham stood near the bar, a tumbler of expensive scotch warming in his palm, surveying the crowd with the casual authority of someone who'd never questioned his place at the center of any room. At 32, he'd maintained most of the athletic build that had made him a starting quarterback, though his jawline had softened slightly, and there were the first hints of crow's feet around his eyes when he smiled, which he was doing now, a sharp, anticipatory grin that didn't quite reach those eyes. "He's not here yet," Blake's old teammate Marcus Powell said, sidling up beside him with a beer. Marcus had gone thick around the middle, his football glory days visible only in old yearbook photos and the way he still walked with an athlete's swagger. "Think he'll actually show?" "Oh, he'll show," Blake replied, taking a slow sip of his drink. "I made sure of it." The invitation had been Blake's masterstroke. 3 months of planning, of tracking down addresses, of crafting the perfect message. He'd even personally called Evan Carter, the first time he'd spoken to him since graduation, with a voice dripping with false warmth. "Evan, buddy, it's Blake." "Yeah, Blake Cunningham. Listen, I know we weren't exactly close in school, but that's ancient history, right? We're planning this reunion, and it wouldn't be complete without everyone there. Come on, man, let bygones be bygones. It'll be good to see you." What Blake hadn't said, what he'd shared with his inner circle over drinks at his father's country club, was the real reason for the invitation. This wasn't about reconciliation. This was about delivering one final devastating humiliation to the man who'd represented everything Blake had despised: weakness, poverty, defeat. Did you see his Facebook profile? Blake's wife Tessa appeared at his elbow, her designer dress probably costing more than most people's monthly rent. She'd been a cheerleader once, dating Blake since junior year, and had perfected the art of looking both sympathetic and superior. Still living in that same rundown neighborhood, still working at that garage. God, it's just sad. "That's exactly why this is going to be perfect," Blake said, his voice low enough that only his closest friends could hear. Around them, the reunion was in full swing, old cliques reforming, stories being embellished, connections being rekindled. But Blake's attention was laser-focused on the entrance. Everyone here has moved on, made something of themselves. Except Evan. He's still stuck in the same place he was 10 years ago, raising that kid alone, covered in grease, barely scraping by. "You really think he'll come?" asked Jennifer Wu, another former cheerleader who'd married into money and never let anyone forget it. "I mean, if I were him, I'd be way too embarrassed." "He'll come," Blake repeated with certainty, because deep down, guys like Evan are still trying to prove something, still hoping that maybe, just maybe, someone will finally see them as an equal. He laughed, a sound without genuine mirth. "It's almost touching, really." The group chuckled, that particular brand of laughter that comes from people who've never really had to struggle, who've never known what it means to choose between groceries and electricity, who've never understood that dignity doesn't come from a bank account. What none of them knew, what Blake himself didn't know, was that across town, in a penthouse suite of the city's most exclusive hotel, Evan Carter was straightening his tie in a mirror that cost more than Blake's entire bar tab. "You don't have to do this," Charlotte Vale said softly from where she sat on the edge of the bed, watching him with concern etched into her elegant features. At 34, she was striking rather than conventionally beautiful. sharp cheekbones, intelligent gray eyes, dark hair swept up in a style that spoke of boardrooms and power lunches. "We can turn around right now. You don't owe these people anything." Evan's hands stilled on his tie, a silk hermes that Charlotte had picked out, navy with a subtle pattern that caught the light. He met her eyes in the mirror, and for a moment something old and painful flickered across his face before being replaced by something harder, more resolved. "I'm not going for them," he said quietly. "I'm going for me, for Lily." So she knows her dad never ran from his past, never hid from the people who tried to make him feel small. He turned to face Charlotte directly. "And maybe I need to prove to myself that I really have moved on, that their words don't have power over me anymore." Charlotte rose and crossed to him, her hands coming up to smooth his lapels even though they didn't need smoothing. The gesture was intimate, familiar, the touch of someone who'd earned the right through patience and genuine care. "You're a better man than all of them combined," she said, and there was no flattery in it, just statement of fact. "You were a better man when you were working 3 jobs and sleeping 4 hours a night. You're a better man now that you're running my automotive division. The circumstances changed, Evan. You never did." He caught her hands in his, brought them to his lips. "How did I get so lucky?" "You fixed my car in a blizzard and refused to take my money," Charlotte replied with a small smile. Everything that came after was just the universe correcting an imbalance. "Charlotte, I know. You don't like it when I talk like that." She pulled back slightly, studying him. "But it's true. That night..." She paused, and he could see her mind traveling back across the years. "That night changed everything. You changed everything." Before Evan could respond, his phone buzzed. A text from his daughter. "Dad, Mom C says you look like a movie star. Send pic. Love you, bye, going to bed now. Good night." The message made both of them smile. Lily, 12 years old now, bright as summer lightning and twice as energetic, had taken to calling Charlotte Mom C about 6 months into their relationship. Charlotte had cried the first time it happened, though she'd tried to hide it. Evan snapped a quick selfie and sent it back with a string of heart emojis that Lily had taught him to use, then pocketed his phone. "Okay," he said, squaring his shoulders. "Let's do this." The drive from the penthouse to the Riverside Grand took 25 minutes, and Evan spent most of it silent, watching the city lights blur past the Rolls-Royce's windows. Daniel, Charlotte's longtime driver, navigated the streets with the kind of precision that came from decades of experience, never once asking about their destination or the tension radiating from the back seat. "Do you remember what you said to me that night?" Charlotte asked suddenly, breaking the silence. "After you fixed the car?" Evan turned to look at her, one eyebrow raised. "I said a lot of things, most of them probably incomprehensible because I couldn't feel my face. You said, 'Just help someone else someday.'" Charlotte's voice was soft but clear. Not "pay me back," not "I'll collect someday," just "pass it on." Do you know how rare that is? How impossibly rare. "Charlotte, let me finish." She shifted to face him more fully. "I was ready to give up that night. Not just on the car, on everything. The company was hemorrhaging money, my board was calling for my head, and I was so tired, Evan, so bone-deep tired of fighting, and then this man crawled under my car in the middle of a blizzard, with hands that were literally bleeding from the cold, and fixed it, and asked for nothing." She reached for his hand. "You reminded me why I started the company in the first place. Not for profit, not for power, but because I wanted to build something that mattered, something that helped people." Evan squeezed her hand but said nothing. What could he say? The truth was, he barely remembered making the decision to help that night. He'd been running on autopilot, moving through life in a fog of grief and exhaustion after losing his wife Sarah to complications from Lily's birth. Stopping to help a stranger hadn't been heroic. It had been automatic, the way his mother had raised him, the way Sarah would have wanted him to be. But Charlotte had remembered, and she'd spent 2 years trying to find him, hiring private investigators, following up on every lead, until finally a receptionist at one of her suppliers had mentioned a brilliant mechanic at Morrison's Auto Repair who'd once worked a miracle on her dying transmission. The rest, as they say, was history. Though calling it history seemed too simple for something so profound. Charlotte hadn't just hired him, she'd seen something in him that he'd stopped seeing in himself. Potential, Worth, a mind that could solve problems others couldn't even identify. Within 6 months, he'd redesigned her company's entire supply chain. Within a year, he'd developed a revolutionary diagnostic system that had saved them millions. And somewhere in between spreadsheets and strategy sessions, between late nights in the lab and early mornings with coffee, they'd fallen in love. "We're almost there, Mr. Carter," Daniel said from the front seat, and Evan felt his stomach tighten. The Riverside Grand came into view, all lit up like a birthday cake, and Evan could see people milling around the entrance, smokers and couples stealing moments away from the noise, former classmates greeting each other with the exaggerated enthusiasm of people who hadn't actually kept in touch. "Last chance to turn around," Charlotte murmured, but she was smiling slightly, knowing he wouldn't take it. "Not a chance," Evan replied. "Besides, you got all dressed up. Would be a shame to waste that dress." Charlotte laughed, the sound light and genuine, cutting through the tension. "You're impossible. You say that like it's news." Daniel pulled the Rolls-Royce smoothly to the curb directly in front of the hotel entrance, the silver paint job catching the light like liquid mercury. Through the tinted windows, Evan could see heads turning, curious faces trying to identify who warranted such an arrival. "Ready?" Charlotte asked. Evan took a deep breath, let it out slowly. "Ready." Daniel opened Charlotte's door first, offering his hand with the practiced grace of someone who'd been doing this for decades. Charlotte stepped out, and Evan heard the subtle shift in the crowd's energy. That particular frequency of surprise and speculation that comes when someone important arrives. Then Daniel opened Evan's door, and he stepped out into the cool autumn evening. For a moment, just one crystalline moment, everything seemed to freeze. The conversations died mid-sentence, the laughter cut off like someone had thrown a switch. Even the traffic seemed to quiet, though that might have been Evan's imagination. He straightened his jacket, custom-tailored Italian wool that moved like water, and turned to offer his hand to Charlotte, even though she'd already exited the car. The gesture was automatic, chivalrous, the kind of thing his mother had taught him before she died. Charlotte took his hand with a smile that was equal parts affection and amusement, knowing exactly what he was doing. And then Evan heard it. A voice he'd know anywhere, even after 10 years. "Holy shit!" Blake Cunningham stood frozen on the hotel steps, his expensive scotch forgotten in his hand, staring at Evan like he'd seen a ghost. Except ghosts didn't wear suits that cost $5,000. Ghosts didn't arrive in Rolls-Royces. And ghosts definitely didn't stand with the kind of quiet confidence that came from knowing, bone deep, that you'd earned your place in the world. Beside Blake, Marcus's beer was halfway to his mouth, suspended in shock. Tessa's carefully maintained expression of superiority had cracked into something closer to confusion. And Jennifer, who'd once laughed the loudest when Blake had tripped Evan in the cafeteria, sending his lunch tray flying, was openly gaping. "Evan?" Blake's voice cracked slightly on the name, as if testing whether this was real. "Evan Carter?" "Hello, Blake," Evan said, his voice carrying across the space between them with a calmness he didn't entirely feel. His heart was hammering against his ribs, but years of presenting to boardrooms full of skeptical executives had taught him how to project serenity even when his insides were churning. "Long time." He started up the steps, Charlotte's hand still in his, and the crowd parted like water before them. Evan could feel eyes tracking his every movement, could hear the whispers starting up, wondering who he was, who she was, what this meant. Someone's phone came up, recording. Then another. Within seconds, half a dozen devices were pointed their way. Blake seemed to be experiencing some kind of cognitive dissonance, his brain unable to reconcile the person in front of him with the image he'd held onto for a decade. Wow, you look different." 10 years will do that," Evan replied evenly. He stopped a few steps below Blake, not rushing to close the distance, letting Blake come to terms with the situation at his own pace. "Is that a Rolls-Royce?" Marcus blurted out, then immediately looked embarrassed by his own question. "Phantom," Charlotte said smoothly, speaking for the first time. Her voice was cultured, confident, the voice of someone who'd spent years in boardrooms and negotiating tables. The extended wheelbase model. Evan prefers it for longer drives. The way she said it, so casual, so matter-of-fact, as if everyone had a Rolls-Royce preference, landed like a bomb in the silence. Blake's eyes darted to Charlotte for the first time, really seeing her, and Evan watched the calculation happen in real time. The dress that probably cost more than his wife's entire wardrobe. The jewelry that was understated but unmistakably real. The bearing of someone who was used to being the most important person in any room. "I don't think we've met," Blake said, extending his hand with a smile that looked like it hurt to produce. "Blake Cunningham." Charlotte shook his hand once, briefly, her grip firm but not aggressive. "Charlotte Vale." The name hung in the air for exactly 3 seconds before someone gasped. Jennifer Wu had her phone out, was frantically typing something, and then her eyes went wide. "Charlotte Vale," she repeated, her voice climbing an octave. "As in, Vale Technologies Charlotte Vale? The Charlotte Vale?" "I prefer just Charlotte," Charlotte said with a slight smile that managed to be both friendly and completely impenetrable. "But yes, I run Vale Tech." The whispers exploded then, spreading through the crowd like wildfire. Vale Technologies. Billion-dollar company. Forbes 500. Revolutionary automotive diagnostic systems. Government contracts. The Charlotte Vale. And she was here, holding hands with Evan Carter. Evan Carter, who'd been voted most likely to peak in high school as a cruel joke. Evan Carter, who'd worn the same 3 shirts in rotation because they were all he could afford. Evan Carter, who Blake had spent 4 years making sure everyone knew was a loser. That Evan Carter. Blake's smile had frozen on his face, no longer even pretending to reach his eyes. Beside him, Tessa was whispering urgently, probably telling him everything her quick Google search was revealing. Marcus looked like he'd been hit in the stomach. And the crowd that had gathered, former classmates who'd watched Blake's bullying with everything from discomfort to active participation, were reassessing everything they thought they knew. "So," Blake said, his voice carefully controlled, "you two are together?" "We are," Evan confirmed, and he couldn't quite keep a note of warmth from entering his voice when he glanced at Charlotte. "Coming up on 2 years now." 2 years? Blake repeated, as if testing the words. "And you're working for her company?" There it was. The assumption, the automatic conclusion that Evan must be some kind of kept man, that he couldn't possibly have earned his place on his own merits. Evan had been expecting it. Hell, he'd have bet money on it. But it still sent a flicker of irritation through him. Charlotte, however, had expected it too. And unlike Evan, who'd spent years learning to control his reactions, Charlotte had spent a lifetime in corporate warfare. She knew exactly how to deploy information for maximum impact. "Working for me?" She laughed, the sound genuinely amused. "Oh no. Evan runs my automotive engineering division. Everything from supply chain optimization to prototype development to our diagnostic AI system, that's all him. I handle the business side. He handles the innovation that makes the business possible." She paused, letting that sink in. He's the reason Vale Tech survived its first 2 years and thrived in the next 8. The silence that followed could have smothered a flame. Evan watched Blake's face cycle through several expressions. Confusion, disbelief, something that might have been grudging respect. And then finally, that flicker of anger that came from having a carefully constructed reality shattered. "That's impressive," Blake managed, though the word sounded like it had been dragged out of him with pliers. "Evan's always been impressive," Charlotte said, and there was steel under the silk now. Some people just needed the right circumstances to see it. The jab was subtle but unmistakable. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. Tessa found something fascinating to look at on her phone, and Blake's jaw tightened just enough that Evan could see it. "Well," Blake said, recovering some of his composure, "we should get inside. Lots of people to catch up with. Evan, I'm sure everyone will be excited to see you. It's been, 10 years since anyone heard from you?" "About that," Evan agreed. "I've been busy." Clearly, Blake's smile was back, but it had a sharp edge now, like a knife poorly hidden. "Come on, let me buy you a drink. We've got so much to catch up on." As they moved toward the entrance, Charlotte leaned in close to Evan and murmured, "He's planning something." "I know," Evan murmured back. "Let him." The ballroom was exactly as Evan had imagined it, all carefully curated nostalgia and forced bonhomie. A slideshow played on one wall, cycling through yearbook photos and candid shots from a decade ago. There was Blake holding a trophy. There was the cheerleading squad mid-jump, There was the cafeteria, the football field, the parking lot where everyone had gathered after school. And there, in one photo that flashed by so quickly Evan almost missed it, was a younger version of himself, thinner, more haunted, wearing a shirt that was slightly too big because it had been his father's before he died. He was alone in the photo, standing apart from the crowd, looking at something off camera with an expression that was hard to name. Longing, maybe. Or just loneliness. "Is that you?" Charlotte asked softly, having caught the image. "Yeah," Evan said. "To junior year, I think. Right after..." He didn't finish the sentence. Right after his dad died. Right after he'd started working full-time at Morrison's garage to keep the lights on. Right after Blake had decided that Evan's vulnerability made him the perfect target. "You look so young," Charlotte said, and there was something in her voice, not pity, never pity, but a kind of aching empathy that made Evan's chest tight. "I was young," he replied. "We all were." Before Charlotte could respond, Blake materialized at Evan's elbow with 2 glasses of scotch. "Here," he said, thrusting one at Evan. "Lagavulin 16, your favorite, right?" Evan accepted the glass more out of reflex than desire, startled that Blake had remembered. Or maybe Blake hadn't remembered at all. Maybe he'd just picked the most expensive scotch at the bar, assuming everyone shared his preferences. "Thanks," Evan said neutrally. "To old friends," Blake said, raising his glass. Around them, the conversation had shifted. People were watching now, curious about this dynamic, sensing something beneath the surface. "To old times," Evan corrected, touching his glass to Blake's but not drinking. He wasn't about to put himself at any disadvantage, wasn't about to dull his awareness even slightly when he could feel the room's attention on him like a weight. Blake's eyes narrowed fractionally, so quick that someone who didn't know him might have missed it, but then his smile widened. "So Evan, tell us all. How exactly did you end up running an engineering division? Last I heard you were still at Morrison's, changing oil and rotating tires." There it was, the setup. Blake was creating a narrative, painting Evan's rise as something improbable, something that needed explanation. And in that need for explanation lived the implication that there was something suspicious about it, something that didn't add up. "Last you heard," Evan repeated, taking a small sip of the scotch and finding it actually was quite good. "When was that, Blake?" "Because I stopped working at Morrison's 7 years ago." 7 years, Charlotte added helpfully, her hand finding the small of Evan's back in a gesture of support that was also unmistakably possessive. "Right around the time I hired him to consult on a supply chain problem we were having. Evan solved it in 3 weeks. The problem had been plaguing us for 2 years and had cost us close to $15 million. $15 million, someone echoed from the crowd. Sarah Brennan, who'd been in AP Calculus with Evan, one of the few people who'd never actively participated in Blake's bullying, even if she'd never stood up to stop it either. That's incredible." "That's Evan," Charlotte said simply. "He sees patterns other people miss. Connections that aren't obvious. I've watched him solve problems in days that teams of highly paid consultants couldn't crack in months." She paused, her eyes finding Blake's. "Some people are naturally talented at making others feel small. Evan's naturally talented at making complex systems work better. I know which skill I value more." The jab landed hard enough that Blake actually flinched. Around them, the crowd was divided. Some people looked uncomfortable. Others were smirking, clearly enjoying seeing Blake get a taste of his own medicine. But Blake hadn't gotten where he was, hadn't maintained his position as the unchallenged center of attention by being easily defeated. He recovered quickly, that smile snapping back into place. "Well, that's a great story," he said, his tone implying it was anything but. "But come on, Evan, you have to admit it's pretty convenient. A billionaire just happens to need your specific talents, happens to hire you, happens to fall in love with you." He laughed, inviting others to join in. "I mean, no offense, but it sounds like something out of a movie. The struggling mechanic who gets discovered by the rich CEO. What are the odds?" And there it was, the real attack. Blake wasn't questioning Evan's abilities, he was questioning his integrity, implying that Evan was some kind of gold digger, that Charlotte was either desperate or deluded, that their relationship was transactional rather than real. Evan felt Charlotte stiffen beside him, felt her drawing breath to respond, and he squeezed her hand gently. "Let me," the gesture said. Let me handle this. You're right, Evan said, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet ballroom. The odds were astronomical, probably lottery level unlikely. He took another sip of scotch, letting the burn ground him. But you know what else was unlikely, Blake? The specific set of circumstances that put Charlotte and me in the same place at the same time. The things that had to happen, the choices we both made, for our paths to cross. He turned slightly, addressing the room rather than just Blake, making this a story everyone could hear because he knew, they all knew, that this moment was being recorded, was probably already being live-streamed by someone. 10 years ago, I was working 3 jobs, Evan said. Morrison's garage during the day, dispatch for a courier service at night, and weekend shifts at a 24-hour diner. I was raising my daughter Lily alone after my wife Sarah died during childbirth. I was exhausted all the time. I was broke all the time. And yeah, I was lonely all the time. He saw some faces in the crowd soften, people who'd maybe heard about Sarah, about Lily, but had never really thought about what that meant in practical terms. One night, December 19th, 2015, about 8 months after graduation, I got called out on a repair job. Someone's car had died in the middle of a blizzard on Route 47, about 20 miles outside town. It was -15 degrees, wind chill probably double that. And I was so tired I could barely see straight, but I went anyway because that was the job. Charlotte's hand tightened in his, and he knew she knew where this was going. She'd heard the story before, but never like this, never in front of an audience, never with this level of detail. When I got there, Evan continued, I found a woman hypothermic in her car, barely conscious. The car's wiring harness had corroded completely, combination of age and road salt. It wasn't a simple fix. It wasn't a jump start and you're good to go situation. It required crawling under the car, in the snow, with bare hands because I couldn't feel the wires through gloves, and essentially rebuilding the connection from scratch. He paused, took a breath. The ballroom was utterly silent now. It took me 2 hours. My hands were bleeding by the end because the metal was so cold it tore skin. I couldn't feel my feet, couldn't feel my face. But I got that car running, and that woman, that stranger, survived. The woman was me, Charlotte said quietly, and several people gasped. I was trying to make it to a board meeting that would determine whether my company lived or died. I was ready to give up, on the company, on everything. And then this man, this exhausted, grieving, barely holding it together man, spent 2 hours in sub-zero temperatures saving my life. I tried to pay him, Charlotte continued, her voice stronger now. Tried to give him $500 for the repair, for his time, for probably saving me from freezing to death. You know what he said? She looked at Blake directly. He said, just help someone else someday. And then he drove away, back to his daughter, back to his other jobs, back to a life that was harder than anything most of us will ever experience. The silence stretched. Someone coughed. Someone else shifted their weight, making their chair creak. That night changed everything for me, Charlotte said. I decided not to sell the company. I decided to fight. And I spent 2 years looking for the man who'd saved my life, because I wanted to thank him properly. When I finally found him, I didn't hire him as charity. I hired him because he demonstrated under the worst possible circumstances the exact qualities I needed in my company. Problem solving under pressure, refusal to give up, and genuine care for doing things right. She turned to face the crowd fully now, and Evan could see the Charlotte who ran boardrooms, who'd built a billion-dollar company through sheer force of will and brilliant strategy. Evan proved himself every single day after that. Every prototype, every system, every innovation that's made Vailtech what it is today. He earned that. Not because of our relationship. Our relationship happened because of who he is. Because the man who'd save a stranger in a blizzard is the same man who'll stay up all night solving a supply chain problem, who'll fight for his team, who'll never take the easy way if the right way is available. Blake's face had gone through several shades of red during this speech, finally settling on a kind of blotchy anger mixed with embarrassment. Around them, phones were still recording, faces were thoughtful or moved or, in some cases, ashamed. So yes, Blake, Charlotte finished, her voice dropping back to conversational levels, but somehow even more powerful for it. The odds were unlikely, but not because of chance, because Evan is the kind of person who makes impossible things happen through sheer determination and integrity. Maybe you should try it sometime. The ballroom erupted. Not in applause, this wasn't a moment for celebration, but in a wave of conversation, everyone turning to their neighbors to process what they'd just heard. Some people looked chastened, others looked angry, probably Blake's longtime friends who didn't appreciate seeing him taken down so thoroughly. And a few, like Sarah Brennan, looked thoughtful, as if reassessing memories through a new lens. Blake stood frozen, his carefully constructed moment of humiliation for Evan having backfired spectacularly. Marcus had disappeared into the crowd. Tessa was staring at her husband with an expression Evan couldn't quite read. Shock, maybe, or disappointment. Or perhaps recognition of something she'd been trying not to see for years. "I think," Evan said into the simmering quiet, "I need some air." He didn't wait for Blake's response, just turned and headed for the balcony doors, Charlotte beside him. The crowd parted for them automatically, and Evan could feel eyes tracking their movement, could imagine the texts and social media posts already flying. The balcony overlooked the river, and the autumn air was cool and clean after the stuffiness of the ballroom. Evan leaned against the railing, closing his eyes and just breathing for a moment. "You okay?" Charlotte asked softly. "Yeah," Evan said, and found he meant it. "Actually, yeah, I am." "That was intense in there." "You eviscerated him," Evan said, turning to look at her with a slight smile. "Politely, eloquently, but eviscerated nonetheless." "He deserved it," Charlotte said flatly. "Planning a whole reunion just to humiliate you, using your struggles, your genuine pain, as entertainment? He deserved worse than words." "Maybe," Evan allowed, "but words are enough. Because the truth is, Charlotte, I don't want revenge. I don't even know what I wanted. Closure, maybe? Proof that I'd survived? That I'd moved past it all?" "And?" Charlotte prompted. "Did you get it?" Evan considered the question, looking out over the dark water. Behind them, through the glass doors, he could see the reunion continuing, though the energy had shifted, become more subdued. Blake was surrounded by his core group, but even from here, Evan could see the defensive body language, the way people were staying just slightly farther away than before. "I think so," Evan said finally, "because standing in there, hearing him try to diminish everything I've built, everything we've built together, I realize his opinion doesn't matter. It never did. The only person whose opinion of me matters is my own, and Lily's, and yours." "In that order?" Charlotte asked with a slight smile. "Probably. Kid comes first, you know." Charlotte laughed and leaned into him, her head on his shoulder. They stood like that for a while, just breathing, just being, while the party continued without them. "Want to know something?" Charlotte said eventually. "I was so nervous about tonight, about meeting these people, about whether they'd accept us, accept me in your life. But now?" She pulled back to look at him. "I don't care. Let them accept us or not. We know what we have." "What do we have?" Evan asked, though he knew the answer. "Everything that matters," Charlotte replied. "Each other, Lily. A life we built together, not because of money or circumstance, but because we chose it, because we chose each other." Evan kissed her then, soft and slow, a promise and a thank you and a celebration all wrapped into one gesture. When they pulled apart, Charlotte was smiling. "Should we go back in?" she asked. "Probably," Evan said, "but maybe just for a few minutes, just long enough to show we're not running away." "We could stay out here," Charlotte suggested. "Make them wonder." Tempting, but no. I came here for closure, and I'm going to get it, on my terms. They returned to the ballroom hand in hand, and if people stared, well, let them stare. Evan moved through the crowd with Charlotte beside him, stopping occasionally to talk with people who approached them. Sarah Brennan came over, apologized for not doing more to stop Blake's bullying back in school. Michael Torres, who'd been in shop class with Evan, expressed genuine happiness at his success. Even Mrs. Henderson, their old English teacher who'd crashed the reunion, pulled him aside to say she'd always known he was special. Blake, notably, stayed away. He held court in his corner with his diminishing circle of supporters, his laughter just a little too loud, his gestures just a little too big. Overcompensating, Evan thought, trying to pretend the evening hadn't been a disaster. Around 10 o'clock, Evan and Charlotte made their goodbyes. They'd stayed long enough, shown enough grace. Now it was time to go home. To Lily, to their life, to the future they were building together. As they stepped outside, Daniel waiting by the Rolls-Royce, Evan heard footsteps behind them. "Evan, wait!" He turned to find Blake standing in the doorway, alone now, his earlier bravado stripped away. In the soft light from the hotel entrance, he looked older, tired, and something else. Something that might have been shame. "Yeah?" Evan said neutrally. Blake opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. That was supposed to go differently tonight." "I bet it was," Evan said. "I wanted..." Blake's hands clenched at his sides. "I wanted you to show up exactly like I remembered you, struggling, defeated, so I could..." He broke off, shaking his head. "God, that sounds even worse out loud." "It does," Charlotte agreed coolly. Blake's eyes flicked to her, then back to Evan. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I wanted you to know that I know. I know what I did to you back then was wrong. I know planning tonight was wrong. And I know that the person who showed up tonight, successful, confident, loved, that person succeeding feels like a judgment on who I am." He laughed bitterly. "Which is insane, right? Your success doesn't diminish mine, but somehow it feels like it does." Evan studied him for a long moment, seeing past the expensive clothes and the defensive posture to something more fundamental. Blake was struggling with his own demons, his own insecurities, just like everyone else. "Blake," Evan said finally, "I'm not going to tell you it's okay. What you did, back then and planning tonight, wasn't okay. It hurt. It still hurts, if I'm honest." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "But I'm also not going to carry anger about it anymore. Not because you deserve forgiveness, but because I deserve peace." "I don't know what to say to that," Blake admitted. "You don't have to say anything," Evan replied. "Just be better. To the people in your life now, to your kids if you have them. Break the cycle instead of perpetuating it." Blake nodded slowly, and for just a moment, Evan saw something genuine in his face. Regret, maybe, or the beginning of self-awareness. "For what it's worth," Blake said, "I'm glad you made it. Really. You deserve better than what life handed you, better than what I handed you." "Thanks," Evan said, and found he meant it. They didn't shake hands, didn't hug, just exchanged nods. Two men who'd shared a painful history, acknowledging it, and then choosing to walk away from it. As the Rolls-Royce pulled away from the hotel, Charlotte squeezed Evan's hand. "That was generous of you, giving him that." "Was it?" Evan leaned back against the leather seat, suddenly exhausted. "I just want it to be over. Want to stop carrying all of it around." "Then let it go," Charlotte said simply. "Let tonight be the end of it. Tomorrow, we go back to our real life. The one we built. The one that matters." Evan turned to look at her, this brilliant, fierce woman who'd changed everything. "I love you," he said. "In case I haven't mentioned it lately." "You mentioned it this morning," Charlotte replied with a smile. "And last night, and approximately 47 times yesterday. But I never get tired of hearing it." "Good, because I plan to keep saying it. Approximately 47 times a day. Maybe more." They rode the rest of the way in comfortable silence, the city lights painting patterns across the car's interior. When they finally reached home, the house they'd bought together, the one with Lily's art all over the refrigerator and photos of their life together lining the hallways, Evan felt something inside him unknot. Lily was asleep on the couch when they came in, their babysitter, Mrs. Chen from down the street, reading a book nearby. "She insisted on waiting up," Mrs. Chen reported with an indulgent smile. "Made it until about 9:30. Evan paid Mrs. Chen generously, thanked her for staying late, and then gently scooped up his daughter. At 12, Lily was getting too big to carry easily, all gangly limbs and growing independence. But tonight she curled into him automatically, still small enough to be his baby girl. "Dad?" she mumbled, not quite awake. "How was it?" "It was good, honey," Evan said, carrying her toward her room. "I'll tell you about it tomorrow." "Did you show them?" Lily asked, her voice slurred with sleep. Did you show them you're not a loser? The question hurt his heart even as it warmed it. I showed them the truth, Evan said, tucking her into bed. That's all anyone can do. Love you, Dad, Lily mumbled, already drifting back to sleep. Love you too, baby, more than anything. Later, lying in bed with Charlotte beside him, Evan stared at the ceiling and thought about the night. About Blake's failed ambush, about standing in that ballroom with Charlotte beside him, not as a trophy or proof of success, but as his partner. About the look on Blake's face when his carefully constructed narrative crumbled. What are you thinking about? Charlotte asked, her hand finding his in the dark. How strange life is, Evan said. 10 years ago, I was convinced I'd never be happy again. That I'd spend the rest of my life just surviving. Getting through each day, raising Lily, that was it. And now? Now I have everything I never let myself hope for, Evan said. You. A career I'm passionate about. Lily happy and healthy, a future that feels possible instead of just heavy. Charlotte rolled over, propping herself up on one elbow to look down at him. You earned all of it, you know, every bit of it. We earned it, Evan corrected. Together. Together, Charlotte agreed and kissed him softly. Now go to sleep. Tomorrow we have that presentation to the board about the new prototype. Tomorrow, Evan agreed, pulling her close. But tonight, we celebrate surviving the reunion from hell. Fair enough, Charlotte laughed. Though I have to say, as far as revenge goes, showing up in a Rolls-Royce with a billionaire girlfriend was pretty spectacular. It wasn't about revenge, Evan protested. I know, Charlotte said. That's what made it so perfect. As Evan drifted toward sleep, he thought about Blake's question from earlier. What were the odds? What were the odds that he'd be on that road that night, that Charlotte would break down in exactly that spot, that he'd stop, would help, would refuse payment in a way that would stick in her memory? Astronomical odds. Impossible odds. But then, maybe that was the point. Maybe the best things in life happen not because they were likely, but because people made unlikely choices. Because they stopped to help strangers in blizzards. Because they built companies based on principles rather than just profit. Because they refused to let cruelty define them. Because they chose every single day to be better than their circumstances demanded. The odds didn't matter. The choice did. And Evan Carter, former loser from Lincoln High School, had made the right choices. Not because they were easy, but because they were right. That was worth more than any Rolls-Royce, more than any revenge, more than anything Blake Cunningham could ever understand. As sleep finally claimed him, Evan smiled. Tomorrow he'd wake up to Lily's laughter and Charlotte's coffee and a job he loved. He'd wake up to a life he'd built, brick by brick, choice by choice, from the ashes of grief and struggle. He'd wake up to proof that sometimes, just sometimes, the underdog wins. Not through revenge, through redemption. The morning after the reunion arrived with the kind of crystalline brightness that made everything feel possible. Evan woke to the sound of Lily's laughter echoing from the kitchen, mixed with Charlotte's lower, warmer tones. For a moment, he just lay there, letting the sounds wash over him, the soundtrack of his new life. So different from those dark years when mornings had meant dragging himself out of bed after 3 hours of sleep to face another day of barely surviving. He found them at the kitchen island, Lily perched on a stool with chocolate chip pancakes in front of her, gesturing wildly as she recounted some story from school. Charlotte was leaning against the counter with her coffee, still in her robe, nodding along with the kind of attention that made Lily feel heard and valued. When she saw Evan in the doorway, her whole face lit up. "Dad!" Lily launched herself off the stool and into his arms with the unself-conscious affection of someone who'd never doubted she was loved. "Mom C says you were amazing last night. Tell me everything. Did Blake guy look stupid? Did everyone freak out about the car? Did you make a dramatic entrance?" "Breathe, sweetheart," Evan laughed, catching her and spinning her around once before setting her down. "And maybe let me have coffee before the interrogation?" "But I want details," Lily insisted, bouncing on her toes. "This is like movie stuff. The underdog returns triumphant. Were people filming? Is it on social media? Can I see?" "Absolutely not," Charlotte and Evan said simultaneously, and then laughed at their synchronization.
You're 12, Evan continued, moving to pour himself coffee. You don't need to see a bunch of adults being dramatic at a reunion. I'm almost 13, Lily corrected with the precision of someone who counted down to birthdays months in advance.
And I'm mature enough to handle it. Mrs. Patterson says I'm very emotionally intelligent. Mrs. Patterson also gave you detention last week for talking during the test, Evan pointed out. That was different. Tommy needed to know the answer to number 7, and I was helping. Lily grabbed her plate and followed Evan to the table. Stop changing the subject. What happened? Charlotte joined them, bringing her coffee and a knowing smile. Your father was dignified and gracious, even when Blake tried to make him look bad. Blake tried to make you look bad? Lily's eyes narrowed with the fierce protectiveness she'd inherited from both her parents. What did he do? Did you punch him? Please tell me you punched him. I did not punch him, Evan said firmly. Violence is never the answer. Violence is sometimes the answer, Lily argued. Like if someone's trying to hurt you or someone you love, that's what Grandma Sarah would have said. The mention of Evan's late wife, Lily's mother, created a moment of quiet. Evan still kept photos of Sarah around the house, had made sure Lily grew up knowing her mother through stories and pictures, even though Sarah had died when Lily was only hours old. Charlotte had never tried to replace Sarah, had instead honored her memory while carving out her own space in their lives. Your mom would have said that defending yourself is different from seeking revenge, Evan said softly, and last night wasn't about revenge. It was about showing that their cruelty didn't break me, that I built something good despite it. With Mom C's help, Lily added, looking between them. With Mom C's help, Evan agreed, though we helped each other. That's what partners do. Lily seemed to consider this, chewing thoughtfully on her pancake. So Blake felt stupid when he saw how successful you are now? I think Blake had some realizations, Charlotte said diplomatically, about how his actions have consequences, about how the people he dismissed might surprise him. Good. Lily's satisfaction was fierce. He deserved it. Anyone who is mean to my dad deserves to feel bad. Lily, Evan started, but she cut him off. No, Dad, I know you're going to say something about forgiveness and being the bigger person, and I get it. I do. But you're allowed to be happy that the bullies finally see what they missed. You're allowed to enjoy that moment. She paused. As long as you don't let it make you mean. That's the difference, right? Enjoying justice isn't the same as being cruel. Evan and Charlotte exchanged glances over Lily's head. Their daughter was wise beyond her years, shaped by circumstances that had forced her to grow up a little faster than most kids, but also by two parents who'd worked hard to teach her the difference between strength and hardness, between confidence and arrogance. You're right, Evan said finally. I did enjoy proving them wrong. I'm human. But I also felt sad for Blake, because he's clearly carrying around his own issues. Happy people don't need to make others feel small. That's what Dr. Morrison says, Lily agreed, referring to the school counselor she'd been seeing occasionally to process the complicated feelings around having lost her biological mother and gained a stepmother. That bullies are usually in pain themselves. Doesn't make it okay, Charlotte added. Understanding why someone hurts others doesn't excuse the hurt, but it does help us respond with wisdom instead of just reacting. They finished breakfast in comfortable conversation, and Evan found himself marveling again at how seamlessly Charlotte had woven herself into their lives. She never tried to be Lily's mother in the biological sense. That role belonged to Sarah and always would. But she'd become something equally important: a parent, a mentor, a safe person to confide in when Dad was too close to a problem or too protective. After Lily left for school, Charlotte pulled out her tablet and started scrolling through something with increasing amusement. You need to see this. See what? Evan peered over her shoulder and froze. The screen showed his and Charlotte's arrival at the reunion, captured from multiple angles by different phones. The videos had been compiled into a thread on social media, and the comments were multiplying by the minute. That's the kind of glow-up that makes you believe in karma. Imagine planning someone's humiliation and they show up in a Rolls-Royce with a literal billionaire. The way she defended him, though, that's love, that's partnership, that's everything. Blake Cunningham really thought he did something. The secondhand embarrassment is real. It's gone viral, Charlotte said, still scrolling. Local news picked it up. 3 different bloggers have written think pieces about bullying and redemption. Someone even made a TikTok reenactment. Oh God. Evan sat down heavily. This is exactly what I didn't want. I didn't want it to be a spectacle. Too late for that, Charlotte said, but her tone was gentle. But look at the comments, Evan. Really look at them. He did, reading through the thread more carefully. And he saw that Charlotte was right. People weren't mocking him. They were celebrating him. Dozens of people were sharing their own stories of being bullied, of struggling, of eventually finding success or happiness or peace. The narrative that had emerged wasn't about revenge or wealth. It was about resilience, about dignity, about refusing to let others define your worth. This gives me hope that my own bully will see what I became, one comment read. Not because I want revenge, but because I want them to know they were wrong about me. The best revenge is living well, another added. This man literally saved his future wife's life years before they even got together. That's the kind of character that deserves success. Huh, Evan said softly. I guess I didn't think about how the story might help other people. Everything you do helps other people, Charlotte said, setting down the tablet to look at him directly. That's who you are. The man who stops in blizzards. The man who works 3 jobs for his daughter. The man who solves problems because they need solving, not for recognition. She paused. That's why I fell in love with you. Not because you were struggling and I wanted to save you, but because you were struggling and still chose kindness. Before Evan could respond, his phone buzzed, then buzzed again. And again. Messages were flooding in. From old coworkers at Morrison's garage, from the dispatcher he'd worked nights for, from Mrs. Chen next door, from people he hadn't spoken to in years who'd seen the videos and wanted to reach out. One message stopped him cold. It was from Tom Morrison, his old boss at the garage, the man who'd kept him employed through those brutal years when Evan was barely functional from grief and exhaustion. Evan saw the videos. Been watching you build something incredible and I couldn't be prouder. You were always more than just a mechanic, always had that spark. Glad someone finally gave you the chance to show it. Come by the garage sometime. First coffee's on me. Tom. Tom, Evan said aloud, showing Charlotte the message. He's the one who hired me when I was 17, kept me on even when I was a mess after Sarah died. Covered shifts when I needed to be with Lily. Never made me feel like charity. Sounds like a good man, Charlotte observed. He is. Evan typed back a response, promising to visit soon, and felt something loosen in his chest. These were the connections that mattered, not Blake's approval or the reunion's judgment, but the people who'd seen him at his lowest and valued him anyway. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of messages and calls. Evan's phone became a portal to his past, with people emerging from years of silence to say they'd always known he'd make it. They'd always believed in him. They were sorry they hadn't stayed in touch. Some of it felt genuine. Some of it felt performative. Evan tried to receive it all with grace, remembering Charlotte's advice about letting people surprise you with their growth. By the time they arrived at Vail Tech for the board presentation, Evan had turned off his phone entirely. The building rose 40 stories above the city, all glass and steel, and the kind of architectural confidence that came from success. But Evan had never been intimidated by it. This was his workspace, his realm, where his ideas took shape and became reality. Ready? Charlotte asked as they rode the elevator to the executive floor. Always, Evan replied, and meant it. The boardroom was one place where his worth was never in question, where his contributions were measured by results rather than perception. The presentation went flawlessly. Evan unveiled the new diagnostic AI prototype, demonstrated its capabilities with a system that could predict vehicular failures up to 6 months before they occurred with 94% accuracy, and fielded questions with the ease of someone who knew his subject inside and out. The board approved expanded funding and a timeline for market testing. Several members congratulated him personally, praising his innovation and vision. It was exactly the kind of success Evan had built his career on. Steady, earned, undeniable. And it felt good in a way that had nothing to do with proving anyone wrong and everything to do with proving himself right. He could do this. He was good at this. His mind, his skills, his instincts, they mattered. Afterward, in Charlotte's office, they collapsed on the leather sofa with the kind of exhausted satisfaction that followed a job well done. You killed it in there,
Charlotte said, loosening her hair from its professional updo. Mitchell was practically salivating over the profit projections. Mitchell salivates over everything that involves money, Evan pointed out. But yeah, it felt good, felt right. So here's a question, Charlotte said, turning to face him more fully. How do you feel now? 24 hours after the reunion, after all the social media chaos, after coming back to the work that matters, how do you actually feel? Evan considered the question seriously, examining his emotions the way he might examine a complex mechanical system, looking for the truth beneath the surface. Lighter, he said finally. I feel lighter. Like I was carrying around this weight I didn't even realize was there. The need to prove something, the fear that maybe Blake was right, and I was just a loser who got lucky. But standing in that ballroom, seeing his face when we arrived, hearing you tell the story of how we met, he paused. I realized I wasn't there to prove anything to them. I was there to prove something to myself. That I'd survived. That I'd thrived. That their cruelty hadn't defined me. And did you? Prove it to yourself? Yeah, Evan said softly. Yeah, I did. Charlotte took his hand, interlacing their fingers. Good. Because you're remarkable, Evan Carter. With or without the reunion, with or without Blake's recognition, with or without any external validation. You're remarkable because of who you are when no one's watching, when it's just you and a problem that needs solving, when it's you and Lily at the kitchen table, when it's you making the choice to stop in a blizzard instead of driving past. You give me too much credit, Evan protested. I give you exactly the right amount of credit, Charlotte corrected. You just don't see yourself clearly yet, but you will. You're getting there. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the city spread out below them through the floor-to-ceiling windows. From this height, everything looked small, manageable, part of a larger pattern. Cars moved like blood cells through arterial streets. People were tiny figures, each carrying their own stories, their own struggles, their own private victories. Can I tell you something? Charlotte said eventually. Something I've never told anyone? Always. She took a breath, as if gathering courage. That night you saved me, December 19th, 2015. I wasn't just driving to a board meeting. I was driving away from my life. I'd written a note. It was in my purse. I was going to the meeting, going to resign, and then... She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Evan felt his chest constrict. Charlotte, I was exhausted, she continued, her voice steady despite the weight of what she was saying. Not just tired. Exhausted in my soul. Everything I'd built was crumbling. My board wanted me out. My investors had lost faith, and I kept thinking, what's the point? Why keep fighting? And then my car died in the middle of nowhere in a blizzard, and I thought, well, that's that. The universe has decided. She turned to look at him, and there were tears in her eyes, but her voice never wavered. And then you appeared, this man who had every reason to drive past, who was clearly exhausted himself, who had his own problems. And you stopped. And you spent 2 hours in the freezing cold fixing my car. And when I tried to pay you, you said no. You said, just help someone else someday. And I realized, her voice caught, I realized that if someone that tired, that struggling, that burdened, could still choose kindness, still choose to help a stranger, then maybe I could choose to keep fighting. Maybe the universe hadn't decided anything. Maybe I still got to choose. I had no idea, Evan said softly. You never said... I couldn't. Not for a long time. It felt too big, too heavy to put on you. Charlotte wiped her eyes. But you need to know. You didn't just save my life that night in the practical sense. You saved it in every sense. You gave me a reason to believe that goodness still existed, that effort still mattered, that maybe there was still purpose in the struggle. Evan pulled her into his arms, holding her close while she cried quietly against his shoulder. This was the foundation of them, he realized. Not the fairy tale version that had gone viral, where the poor mechanic won the heart of the billionaire. But this... the real story of two people who'd been drowning in different ways and somehow, impossibly, had found each other in the darkness and decided to swim toward light together. Thank you for telling me, he said finally. And for the record, you saved me too.
You gave me a future when I thought all I had left was survival. You gave me purpose beyond just getting through each day. You gave me hope. They held each other for a long time, the city humming below them, the afternoon sun painting gold across the office walls. Some moments, Evan thought, were too sacred for words. Some connections too profound for explanation. You could only honor them by being present, by showing up, by choosing each other over and over again. Eventually, they had to return to work. Charlotte had 3 more meetings, and Evan had a prototype to refine. But something had shifted between them. A deeper understanding, a fuller picture of the journey that had brought them to this moment. That evening, Evan kept his promise to visit Tom Morrison at the garage. The place looked exactly as he remembered. Weathered brick building, hand-painted sign that was more rust than paint, the perpetual smell of motor oil and old coffee. But where he'd once seen it as a symbol of his limitations, now he saw it as a symbol of resilience. This garage had weathered economic crashes, changing technologies, and decades of competition. It was still here, still fixing cars, still serving the community. Tom was under a Honda Civic when Evan arrived, his legs sticking out from beneath the chassis. But he must have heard the bell over the door because he rolled out and sat up, his weathered face breaking into a genuine smile. "Evan Carter," he said, standing and wiping his hands on a rag that had probably never been clean. "Look at you, all grown up and fancy." "Not that fancy," Evan said, accepting Tom's oil-stained handshake. "Still know my way around an engine." "I saw the videos," Tom said, leading him toward the small office where they'd drunk countless cups of terrible coffee during Evan's years here. "The reunion, the Rolls-Royce, the whole thing, internet's having a field day." "Don't remind me," Evan groaned. "It wasn't supposed to be a spectacle." "But it was," Tom said, pouring 2 cups of coffee from a pot that looked like it had been brewing since morning. "And you know what? Good. Those kids who made your life hell back then needed to see what you became. Not because you need their validation, but because maybe it'll make them think twice before dismissing the next person who's struggling." Evan accepted the coffee, which was exactly as bad as he remembered, and settled into the worn chair across from Tom's desk. "I've been thinking about those years a lot since the reunion, how dark they were, how I barely remember whole months because I was just operating on autopilot." "You were grieving," Tom said simply, "and working yourself to death trying to provide for that baby girl would have broken most men." "There were days I thought it would break me," Evan admitted. "Days I wasn't sure I could keep going, but I had Lily, and I had this place. You kept me afloat, Tom. You and the routine, the work, the stability of knowing I had somewhere to be, something I was good at." Tom shifted uncomfortably, never one for emotional conversation. "You were a good worker, best diagnostic instincts I've ever seen. Could listen to an engine and know what was wrong before you even looked under the hood. That's a gift." "One you helped me develop," Evan said. "You could have hired anyone, Tom. Could have hired someone less complicated, less distracted, less damaged. But you kept me on. Covered for me when I fell asleep on the job from exhaustion. Let me bring Lily to work when the sitter fell through. Never made me feel like I owed you for the accommodation." "Because you didn't owe me," Tom replied gruffly. "You showed up. You worked hard. You cared about doing the job right. That's all I ever asked." They talked for over an hour, catching up on the years since Evan had left for Vailtech. Tom's son had taken over more of the day-to-day operations. The garage was doing well, adapting to electric vehicles and newer technologies. Tom himself was thinking about semi-retirement, spending more time with his grandkids. "You ever miss it?" Tom asked as Evan was preparing to leave. "The hands-on work? The simplicity of it?" Evan considered the question. "Sometimes," he admitted. "There's something pure about fixing a car. Problem, solution, fixed. The work I do now is more complex, more abstract, but it's also more impactful. The systems I develop will help millions of drivers, prevent accidents, save lives." He paused. "Though I won't lie, I miss the smell of motor oil sometimes, the satisfaction of getting your hands dirty." "You know you're always welcome back here," Tom said. "Not to work necessarily, but to tinker, to remember where you came from." "I'd like that," Evan said, and meant it. "Maybe bring Lily by sometime, show her what her dad used to do before the fancy office." "She'd be welcome," Tom said. "And Evan, I'm proud of you, always have been. But not because of the success or the money or the billionaire girlfriend, I'm proud because you stayed kind, stayed decent. That's rarer than you think. The drive home took Evan through neighborhoods he'd once known intimately. The apartment complex where he'd raised Lily in a one-bedroom unit, the 24-hour diner where he'd worked weekend shifts, the park where he'd pushed her on swings during the few hours of daylight he got to spend with her. The geography of his struggle mapped across a city that had both challenged and sustained him. He found himself pulling over at the park, getting out to walk through the empty playground in the fading light. The swings were different now, newer, safer. But the bones of the place were the same. He could almost see his younger self here, hollow-eyed from exhaustion, pushing a toddler Lily who squealed with delight, her joy the only thing that made the exhaustion bearable. "I made it," he said quietly to that memory of himself. "You probably don't believe it yet, but you will. You'll make it. She'll be okay. You'll be okay. Better than okay." His phone rang, interrupting the moment. Charlotte's name flashed on the screen. "Hey," he answered. "Everything okay?" "Everything's fine," she assured him. "I'm leaving the office now. Where are you?" "At the park. The one near my old apartment. I stopped by to visit Tom and just ended up here." "Want company?" Charlotte asked. "I can come to you." "You don't mind?" "Evan, I love every part of you, including the parts that need to visit old parks and process complicated feelings. I'll be there in 15 minutes. While he waited, Evan sat on one of the benches, watching the last light fade from the sky. Other parents were arriving now, bringing kids home from after-school activities, their minivans and sedans a stark contrast to the Rolls-Royce he'd arrived in. Evan felt acutely aware of the distance he'd traveled, not just in miles or wealth, but in circumstance, in possibility, in hope. Charlotte arrived exactly when she'd said, trading her heels for sneakers she kept in the car and settling beside him on the bench without comment. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the playground slowly empty as families headed home for dinner. "This is where you brought her?" Charlotte asked finally. "When she was little?" "Every weekend I had free," Evan confirmed. "Which wasn't often. But yeah, she loved the swings. Would go for an hour straight if I let her, just pumping her little legs and laughing." He smiled at the memory. "She was fearless. Still is." "She gets that from you," Charlotte said. "I'm not fearless." "You're the bravest person I know," Charlotte corrected. "Brave isn't the same as fearless. Brave is being terrified and doing it anyway. And you did that every single day for years. Got up, went to work, took care of your daughter, kept moving forward even when you wanted to quit. That's bravery." "Or stubbornness," Evan suggested. "Both can be true," Charlotte allowed, "but I stand by bravery." They watched a father push his daughter on the swings, her laughter carrying across the playground, and Evan felt a pang of something, not quite nostalgia, not quite grief, recognition, maybe, of who he'd been, who he'd become, the distance between them and the bridge that connected them. "I want to tell you something," Evan said, "about that night. The blizzard, your car, all of it." Charlotte turned to look at him, waiting. "I almost didn't stop," Evan admitted. "I was so tired, Charlotte, so beyond exhausted. And I saw your car on the side of the road, and my first thought was to keep driving, to tell myself someone else would stop, that I'd done enough for one day, that I had to get home to Lily." He paused. "But then I thought about Sarah, about how she always stopped for people, always helped, and I thought, what would I want someone to do if it was her stranded out there? And I couldn't drive past after that." "Sarah," Charlotte repeated softly, "you stopped because of her?" "I stopped because of who she taught me to be," Evan clarified. Sarah believed that we're all connected, that helping others is how we honor our own humanity. She was a nurse. She spent her life caring for people. And even though she'd been gone for months at that point, even though grief was crushing me, I couldn't betray what she'd believed in, couldn't drive past someone who needed help. Charlotte was quiet for a long moment. "Thank you for telling me that. And thank you to Sarah, wherever she is, for raising a man who stops in blizzards." "Do you ever feel weird?" Evan asked. "About Sarah, I mean. About the fact that I was married before, that there's this whole part of my life that didn't include you?" "No," Charlotte said without hesitation. "Because Sarah is part of why you're the man I love. She shaped you, and she gave you Lily, her voice caught,
who's become one of the greatest joys of my life. I don't feel threatened by Sarah. I feel grateful for her and sad that she never got to see what her daughter is becoming. She'd like you, Evan said. Sarah. She'd like that you make Lily laugh, that you challenge her intellectually, that you're teaching her about business and confidence and how to take up space in the world. I hope she would, Charlotte said, because I take that responsibility seriously, being part of Lily's life, helping raise her. I never want to replace Sarah. I can't and shouldn't, but I want to be someone Lily can trust, can rely on, can come to with the things she can't tell her dad. You already are, Evan assured her. The other day, she told me she wants to study engineering like her dad and business like her mom C, said she's going to build things that matter and make sure they reach people who need them. Charlotte laughed, wiping at her eyes. She's going to change the world. Probably, Evan agreed. If we don't screw her up first. We won't, Charlotte said with certainty. Because we both understand what it means to struggle, to fight for what matters. We'll teach her empathy alongside ambition, compassion alongside confidence. They stayed at the park until full dark, talking about Lily, about the future, about the strange journey that had brought them here. Finally, as the temperature dropped and Charlotte started shivering despite her jacket, they headed to their respective cars. Race you home, Charlotte suggested with a mischievous smile. In a Rolls-Royce versus your Tesla? Evan laughed. That's not even remotely fair. Your car literally drives itself. So does yours, Charlotte pointed out. Yeah, but I actually paid attention to the engineering, Evan countered. I know all the shortcuts the AI uses. Are you suggesting you're a better driver than artificial intelligence? I'm suggesting I'm a more creative driver than artificial intelligence, Evan corrected. There's a difference. They bantered all the way to their cars, the easy affection of two people who'd found in each other not just love, but genuine like, the kind of friendship that sustained a relationship through the mundane days between the dramatic moments. At home, Lily was at the kitchen table doing homework, her brow furrowed in concentration. She looked up when they came in together, her expression shifting to one of exaggerated patience. Finally, she said, I've been waiting for you guys to help me with this stupid math problem for like an hour. You could have texted, Evan pointed out, moving to look over her shoulder at the problem. I did text like 10 times. You didn't answer. Evan checked his phone, which he'd silenced during the board meeting and never unsilenced. Sure enough, a string of increasingly dramatic texts from Lily chronicled her journey through algebra frustration. Sorry, baby, he said, genuinely apologetic. Show me what you're working on. The next hour passed in the comfortable chaos of family life, dinner preparation, homework help, debate about whether Lily could stay up an extra hour since tomorrow was Saturday, negotiation about screen time limits. Normal life, Evan thought. The kind of beautifully mundane normal he'd once thought was forever beyond his reach. Later, after Lily was in bed, Evan found Charlotte on the back patio, wrapped in a blanket against the autumn chill, staring up at the stars. Penny for your thoughts, he said, settling beside her. I was thinking about paths, Charlotte said, about how many tiny decisions had to happen exactly right for us to find each other. If I'd sold the company instead of fighting for it. If you'd driven past that night, if I'd never tracked you down afterward. Any one of those choices goes differently, and we never happen. Scary thought, Evan said. Terrifying, Charlotte agreed. Which is why I don't take any of this for granted. Not you, not Lily, not this life we've built. Every day feels like a gift I almost didn't receive. Me too, Evan said softly. 10 years ago, if you told me this was my future, you, Lily thriving, work I'm passionate about, actual happiness, I'd have thought you were cruel for lying. The future seemed like just more of the present, stretching out forever. More exhaustion, more struggle, more barely surviving. But you survived anyway, Charlotte said, even when you didn't believe it would get better. That's the difference between you and Blake, you know. He's never had to survive anything, never had to prove he could endure. So he mistakes comfort for strength, mistakes cruelty for power. He doesn't understand that real strength is what you did, showing up day after day when every day felt impossible. Evan pulled her closer, feeling the warmth of her against the cool night. You know what's funny? Blake thought he was teaching me a lesson back in high school. Thought he was showing me my place, keeping me humble, or whatever he told himself to justify it.
But what he actually did was teach me that other people's opinions don't define my worth, that I could be mocked and dismissed and written off and still be valuable, still be worthy of love and success and happiness. Best lesson he never meant to teach, Charlotte observed. Exactly. Evan tilted his head back to look at the stars. I used to hate him so much, spend hours imagining scenarios where I'd make him feel small, where I'd get revenge. But now I just feel sorry for him. Sorry that he needs to hurt others to feel powerful. Sorry that he's probably going to teach his kids the same cruelty unless something changes. You think it will? Change? I don't know, Evan admitted, but I hope so. For his kids' sake, if not his own, no child deserves to grow up learning that cruelty is strength. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel slowly overhead, and Evan felt something settle deep in his chest. Peace, maybe, or acceptance, or simply the understanding that he'd done more than survive. He'd actually, impossibly, built a life worth living. The fallout from the reunion continued to ripple outward like waves from a stone thrown into still water. By Monday morning, 3 different news outlets had reached out to Vailtech's communications department requesting interviews with Evan. A podcast about redemption stories wanted him as a guest. Someone had even started a hashtag, #Rolls-Royce Redemption, that was trending locally and gaining traction nationally. Evan sat at his desk staring at the interview requests that Charlotte's assistant had forwarded, feeling a mix of flattery and discomfort. This wasn't why he'd gone to the reunion. He hadn't wanted to become some kind of viral inspiration, a symbol people projected their own struggles onto. You don't have to do any of them, Charlotte said from his office doorway. She'd taken to checking on him between meetings, sensing his unease with the sudden attention. Just say no. The story will fade. Something else will capture the internet's attention. I know, Evan said, but some of these messages, he gestured at his screen, there are people writing to say the story gave them hope, that seeing someone overcome bullying and build something good made them believe they could do the same. How do I ignore that? Charlotte crossed the room and perched on the edge of his desk, a position that would have scandalized her executive team if anyone had walked in. You don't have to be responsible for everyone's hope, Evan. That's too heavy a burden for anyone to carry. But what if I could help? Evan argued. What if talking about it, really talking about what those years were like, how I survived them, what I learned, what if that actually makes a difference for someone? Then you do it, Charlotte said simply. But you do it because you want to, not because you feel obligated. And you do it on your terms, saying what you want to say, not what they want to hear. Evan considered this, scrolling through the requests again. Most were typical media, local news wanting a feel-good story, bloggers chasing clicks. But one stood out, a nonprofit that worked with at-risk youth, providing mentorship and support for kids dealing with bullying, poverty, and family trauma. They weren't asking for an interview. They were asking if he'd be willing to speak to a group of teenagers who were struggling with many of the same challenges he'd faced. This one, he said, pulling it up for Charlotte to see. This feels right. Charlotte read it over his shoulder, and he felt her smile. Of course, that's the one you'd choose, not the big media platform, but the small room of kids who actually need to hear from you. Is that bad? Evan asked, suddenly uncertain. It's perfect, Charlotte assured him. It's you. You've never been interested in the spotlight. You've always been about the actual work, the real impact. She paused. When do they want you? This Saturday afternoon, Evan said. At the community center downtown, small group, maybe 15 kids. Tell them yes, Charlotte said. I'll clear your schedule. Our schedule, Evan corrected. You're coming with me. Charlotte raised an eyebrow. You want me there? These kids need to hear from both of us, Evan explained. They need to hear from someone who struggled and survived, yeah. But they also need to hear from someone who succeeded on a different path. Someone who built something from intelligence and determination. Someone who had resources but still faced challenges. You balance me, Charlotte. You always have. Okay, Charlotte agreed softly. We'll go together. The rest of the week passed in a blur of work and preparation. Evan found himself thinking constantly about what he wanted to say to these kids, how to be honest about the darkness without making it seem hopeless, how to acknowledge the unfairness of life while still encouraging them to keep fighting. He asked Lily about it one night while helping her with her history homework. If you were struggling, really struggling, what would you want to hear from an adult? What would actually help versus what's just empty platitudes? Lily looked up from her textbook, considering the question with the seriousness she brought to everything. I'd want to know it gets better, but I'd also want to know how. Like, don't just tell me it gets better eventually. Tell me what I can do right now, today, to make tomorrow a little less hard. That's wise, Evan said. I'm a wise person, Lily replied without a trace of irony. Also, I'd want to know that being sad or angry or scared doesn't make me weak. That those feelings are normal and okay, and that I don't have to pretend to be fine when I'm not. Evan felt his throat tighten. Did someone make you feel like you had to pretend? Not someone, Lily said carefully. But sometimes at school, when kids talk about their problems, other kids act like they're being dramatic. Like if you're upset about something, you're weak or attention-seeking, so people learn to hide it, to say they're fine when they're not. That's not okay, Evan said firmly. Your feelings are always valid, Lily. Always. You never have to pretend with us. I know, Lily assured him. You and Mom C are good about that. But not everyone has parents like you guys. Some kids don't have anyone they can be real with. That conversation stayed with Evan all week, informing what he planned to say. By Saturday, he'd filled 3 notebooks with thoughts and ideas, then thrown them all away in favor of just speaking from the heart. The Riverside Community Center was a squat brick building that had seen better days, its paint peeling and signs slightly crooked. But inside it was clean and warm, with bright posters covering the walls and the smell of fresh coffee coming from somewhere. A woman in her 50s met them at the entrance, her smile genuine and her handshake firm. Mr. Carter, Ms. Vale, I'm Rebecca Torres. I run the youth mentorship program here. Thank you so much for coming. Please call us Evan and Charlotte, Evan said. And thank you for inviting us. This is important work you're doing. We try, Rebecca said, leading them down a hallway covered in artwork, clearly created by the kids in the program. Most of these young people have been through things no child should experience. Abuse, neglect, poverty, violence. They come here because it's safe, because we see them as people rather than problems. But they need more than safety. They need hope. Real hope. Not the fake kind adults feed them that rings hollow. She stopped outside a door, her hand on the knob. I should warn you, some of them will be skeptical. They've heard a lot of success stories from people who don't really understand what they're going through. They might push back, might test you. That's normal. That's them protecting themselves. I understand, Evan said, and he did. He'd been that skeptical kid once, dismissing adults who tried to help because their help felt like pity. The room held about 20 teenagers, ranging from maybe 13 to 18, sprawled across mismatched chairs and worn couches. They looked up when Rebecca entered, their expressions ranging from curious to hostile to completely blank. Evan recognized that blankness, the protective numbness of someone who'd been disappointed too many times to risk hope. Everyone, these are our speakers today, Evan Carter and Charlotte Vale. They've agreed to share their stories with you and answer any questions you might have. Rebecca gestured to 2 chairs at the front. The floor is yours. Evan and Charlotte settled into the chairs, and for a moment, Evan just looked at the assembled kids, really seeing them. A girl with purple hair and defensive eyes. A boy who couldn't have been more than 14, already carrying the weight of the world in his shoulders. Twin girls who sat so close they were almost one person, clearly relying on each other to survive. A lanky teenager with a healing black eye who wouldn't meet anyone's gaze. Hi, Evan started, then stopped, suddenly uncertain how to begin. All his preparation fled in the face of these real kids with their real pain. So he did what always worked best for him. He told the truth. I don't really know how to do this, he admitted. I've given presentations to boardrooms full of executives, but this feels harder, more important, because I want to get it right, and I'm terrified I'll say the wrong thing or make you feel worse instead of better. A few kids shifted, their defensive postures softening slightly at his honesty. So I'm just going to tell you my story, And if it helps, great. If it doesn't, that's okay too. Your journey is your own, and no one else's experience can tell you exactly how yours will go. Evan took a breath. When I was 17, my dad died of a heart attack. Sudden, no warning. One day he was there, the next he wasn't. We didn't have life insurance. We had some savings, but not much. I had to drop out of my senior year to work full-time so we wouldn't lose the house. He saw recognition flicker across several faces, kids who understood that particular terror of losing everything. I went back and finished school at night, got my diploma. Met a girl named Sarah who was kind and patient and saw something in me beyond the exhaustion and grief. We got married too young, both of us 19, got pregnant even younger, and then his voice caught, but he pushed through. Sarah died the day Lily was born. Complications from the delivery. I was 20 years old with a newborn daughter and no idea how to survive it. The room was completely silent now, every eye on him. For the next 3 years, I worked 3 jobs. Mechanic during the day, dispatcher at night, weekend shifts at a diner. Slept maybe 4 hours a night. There were days I was so tired I'd forget where I was, what I was doing. Days I'd sit in my car and cry because I couldn't figure out how to keep going. He paused. But I had Lily, and she needed me, so I kept going because the alternative was unthinkable. And then you met her and got rich and everything was fine, the girl said, her voice dripping with sarcasm as she gestured at Charlotte. Great story, very inspiring. No, Evan said firmly. That's not how it happened. I met Charlotte 7 years after Sarah died, 7 years of grinding poverty and exhaustion, 7 years of being mocked by people who should have been better, 7 years of wondering if this was all my life would ever be. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, looking directly at the sarcastic girl. And you know what I learned in those 7 years? That survival itself is success. That getting through another day when every day feels impossible. That's not just enduring. That's winning. It doesn't feel like winning. It feels like drowning. But you're still here. That counts. But it did get better for you, the girl pressed. You got lucky. You saved some rich lady's life and she rewarded you. That's not a strategy. That's a lottery ticket. You're right, Charlotte said, speaking for the first time. It was luck. But luck that wouldn't have mattered if Evan hadn't been the kind of person who stops to help strangers in blizzards. Luck that wouldn't have mattered if he hadn't spent years developing skills and knowledge that made him valuable to my company. She stood, moving to stand beside Evan's chair. Can I tell you about my path? Because it looked nothing like his, but it was hard in different ways. The room waited, skepticism still hanging in the air, but mixed now with curiosity. I grew up with money, Charlotte said bluntly. My father owned a tech company. My mother was a lawyer. I went to private schools, had tutors, got into MIT. From the outside, it looked easy. But my father was also an alcoholic who became violent when he drank. My mother coped by working 80 hours a week and pretending everything was fine. I learned to be perfect because perfect meant invisible, and invisible meant safe. She moved to the window, looking out at the afternoon light. I started my company at 26 with money from investors who expected me to fail. A woman in tech, that young, with ideas that seemed impossible. They gave me funding because they thought watching me crash and burn would be entertaining, and for years I almost did fail, almost proved them right. So why didn't you? The boy with the black eye asked, speaking for the first time. Because I met someone who reminded me why I started, Charlotte said, turning to smile at Evan. Someone who had every reason to be bitter and cruel, to hoard kindness like a scarce resource, but who chose to help anyway, who chose to be good when being good cost him dearly. That's the thing no one tells you about success, Evan added. It's not just hard work. It's not just talent or opportunity. It's also about the choices you make when you're at your lowest. Do you let the pain make you cruel, or do you find a way to stay kind despite it? Kindness doesn't pay bills, a different girl said flatly. I've been kind, I've been good, and I'm still living in a shelter with my mom and my little brother. So what good is it? You're right, Evan said. Kindness doesn't pay bills directly, but it does something else. It keeps you human. It prevents the pain from turning you into someone you don't recognize, someone who hurts others because you're hurting. He thought about Blake, about how the need to diminish others had hollowed him out. I knew people in school who decided their pain gave them permission to cause pain, who made cruelty their identity. And you know what?
They're still miserable, still trying to fill holes that can't be filled with other people's suffering. So what are we supposed to do? The purple-haired girl asked, and her defenses were cracking now, real emotion bleeding through. Just keep struggling and hope it gets better? Keep being kind and wait for our lottery ticket moment? No, Charlotte said. You fight, strategically, intelligently, relentlessly. You identify what skills you have or can develop. You find people and organizations that can help. Places like this center, programs designed to support kids in difficult circumstances. You make a plan, even if it's just for the next week, the next day, the next hour. And you give yourself credit for surviving, Evan added.
Because society acts like survival is the bare minimum, but it's not. Survival when life is actively trying to break you is extraordinary. It's heroic. You're heroic, every single one of you, just for being here, for still trying. The room was quiet for a long moment, and Evan could see kids processing, considering, weighing his words against their own experiences. Can I ask something? One of the twin girls said, her voice soft. How do you know when to keep fighting and when to just accept that things might not get better? That's the hardest question, Evan admitted, and I don't have a perfect answer. There were nights I wanted to give up, nights I thought about just walking away from everything because the weight was too much. But I couldn't because of Lily. She kept me tethered. What if you don't have a kid? The girl pressed. What if you don't have anything tethering you? Then you create something, Charlotte said gently. A goal, a project, a person you want to become. Something that gives you a reason to see tomorrow. It doesn't have to be big. It can be as simple as, I want to read that book, or I want to see how that show ends, or I want to prove that one teacher wrong. I want to prove everyone wrong, the boy with the black eyes said suddenly. Everyone who thinks I'm going to end up like my dad, in prison or dead. I want to be nothing like him. Then you're already winning, Evan said, because you've identified what you don't want to be. That's the first step. The next step is figuring out what you do want to be. What if I don't know? The boy asked. Then you experiment, Charlotte suggested. Try different things. Take classes, volunteer, read books about subjects that interest you. You're young enough that not knowing is okay. Expected, even. They talked for another 2 hours, the conversation flowing between stories and questions and advice. Evan told them about the time he fell asleep during an oil change and woke up to find Lily had drawn all over his face with marker while the customer waited. Charlotte shared about her first major business failure, a product that bombed so badly it nearly bankrupted her company. They talked about therapists and support systems, about financial aid and scholarship programs, about the small daily choices that accumulated into larger changes. As the session wound down, the purple-haired girl approached Evan, her earlier sarcasm replaced by something more vulnerable. Can I ask you something? She said. Something I can't ask with everyone listening. Of course, Evan said. She glanced around, making sure no one else was in earshot. Did you ever think about just ending it when it got really bad? Evan felt his chest tighten. This question was a razor's edge. Answer wrong, and he could do real damage. Yes, he said honestly. A few times. Usually at 3 a.m. when I couldn't sleep and couldn't turn off my brain, and the future looked like nothing but more of the same crushing exhaustion. What stopped you? She asked. Different things, different times, Evan said. Sometimes it was Lily, the knowledge that she needed me, that I was all she had. Sometimes it was stubbornness, the refusal to let my dad's death and Sarah's death and all the people who'd written me off be right about me being a quitter. And sometimes... He paused, making sure she heard this part. Sometimes it was just making myself promise to wait one more day, just one. And then the next morning, I'd make the same promise again, one more day. Does it get easier? She asked, making that promise? Eventually, Evan said, not all at once, not in a straight line, but gradually the days that felt impossible became merely difficult. The days that felt difficult became manageable. And eventually, I had days that felt good, days when I laughed or felt proud or thought, I want to be here tomorrow. The girl nodded slowly, and Evan saw tears in her eyes that she was fighting to control. Thank you for not lying, for not saying it's easy, or that everything happens for a reason, or any of that stuff adults usually say. Everything doesn't happen for a reason, Evan said. Sometimes terrible things happen for no reason at all. But we can decide what we do with those terrible things. We can let them define us, or we can define ourselves despite them. After the girl walked away, Rebecca approached with tears in her own eyes. That was exactly what they needed to hear. Not false hope, but real hope. The kind that acknowledges how hard it is while still insisting it's worth trying. I hope it helps, Evan said. It will, Rebecca assured him. Maybe not today, maybe not for everyone, but someone in that room heard exactly what they needed to keep going one more day, and that's everything. In the car on the way home, Evan and Charlotte were both quiet, processing the afternoon. Finally, Charlotte reached over and took his hand. You were amazing in there, she said. The way you connected with them, the way you made them feel seen, that was pure Evan. I just told the truth, Evan said. That's what made it so powerful, Charlotte replied. In a world full of people telling pretty lies, the truth is revolutionary. They stopped for dinner at a small Italian place they both loved, the kind of neighborhood restaurant where the owner knew their names and always saved them their favorite corner booth. Over pasta and wine, they talked about the kids, about which ones seemed most at risk, about how Rebecca's program made a difference but couldn't solve everything. I want to do more, Evan said. Today was good, but it's not enough. These kids need ongoing support, not just a one-time talk. What are you thinking? Charlotte asked, though her smile suggested she already knew. A scholarship fund, Evan said, specifically for kids who've aged out of foster care or who are supporting themselves. Something that covers not just tuition, but living expenses, books, emergency funds. Something that actually gives them a real chance. I love it, Charlotte said. And I have a better idea. We do it through Vail Tech. Make it a corporate initiative. We recruit from the program, offer internships, create a pipeline for kids who need opportunities. We can afford to take chances on people others overlook. Because someone took a chance on me, Evan said. Because everyone deserves that chance, Charlotte corrected. But yes, also because of you. Because you proved that potential exists in unexpected places. They spent the rest of dinner planning, sketching out ideas on napkins, getting increasingly excited about the possibilities. By the time they left, they had the bones of a program that could help dozens of kids each year, maybe more as it grew. The drive home took them past Evan's old apartment complex, and on impulse he pulled over. Want to see where I lived? He asked Charlotte. I don't think I've ever actually shown you. Are you sure? Charlotte asked. We don't have to revisit difficult places. I want to, Evan said. I want to show you where I came from. All of it, not just the parts that are easy to talk about. They parked and walked up to the second floor of Building C, stopping in front of Unit 214. The door was different now, painted blue instead of the peeling white, he remembered, but the bones were the same. One bedroom, Evan said. Lily had the bedroom. I slept on the couch. 800 square feet of barely controlled chaos. The heater barely worked, the water pressure was non-existent, and the neighbors upstairs fought constantly. But it was ours. It was safe. It was home. Charlotte squeezed his hand, saying nothing, just being present with him in this moment of remembering. I used to stand right here, Evan continued, gesturing to the spot where they stood, after putting Lily to bed, and look out at the city lights. Wonder what all those people were doing, whether any of them were struggling like me, or if I was uniquely cursed, whether I'd ever be one of those people with lit windows and stable lives and reasons to smile. And now you are, Charlotte said softly. And now I am, Evan agreed, which feels impossible and inevitable at the same time, like it could never have happened, and like it was always going to happen. They stood there for a while, Evan showing Charlotte the playground where he'd pushed Lily on swings, the laundromat where they'd spent countless Sunday mornings, the corner store where the owner had let him run a tab when money was impossibly tight. The geography of survival, mapped across a neighborhood that had held him when he had nowhere else to go. Thank you for showing me this, Charlotte said as they walked back to the car. For trusting me with the hard parts, not just the triumph parts. The hard parts made the triumph possible, Evan said. They're not separate stories, they're one story. At home, Lily was waiting with barely contained excitement, bouncing on her toes as they walked through the door. So? She demanded. How did it go? Did the kids like you? Did you inspire them? Did anyone cry?
Several people cried, Evan admitted, including me, a little bit. Dad, Lily groaned, you cry at commercials. That doesn't count. Hey, that commercial with the dog reuniting with his soldier owner was very emotional, Evan protested. It was an ad for truck insurance, Lily said flatly. And very effective, Evan maintained, and Charlotte burst out laughing.
They told Lily about the afternoon over hot chocolate, the kids they'd met, the questions they'd answered, the scholarship fund they were planning. Lily listened with the intense focus she brought to things she cared about, occasionally interrupting with questions or suggestions. Can I help? She asked finally. With the scholarship thing, I want to be involved. How would you want to help? Charlotte asked. I could mentor younger kids, Lily suggested, like middle schoolers who are dealing with hard stuff. I know what it's like to lose a parent. I know what it's like when everyone else seems to have normal families and yours is different. Maybe I could help them feel less alone. Evan felt his throat close up with pride. His daughter, his brave, brilliant, empathetic daughter, wanted to turn her own pain into purpose. That's a beautiful idea, sweetheart. We'll figure out how to make it work. Later, after Lily had gone to bed and the house was quiet, Evan found himself back at the kitchen table with Charlotte, both of them too wired to sleep. Do you ever worry that we're too happy? Evan asked. Like we're waiting for the other shoe to drop? Sometimes, Charlotte admitted. I think anyone who's been through real hardship has that fear. That happiness is temporary, that disaster is always waiting. How do you deal with it? Evan asked. I remind myself that happiness isn't a finite resource that runs out, Charlotte said. That I'm allowed to be happy, and that being happy doesn't mean bad things won't happen. It just means I'm choosing to be present in this moment instead of living in fear of future moments. That's very zen of you, Evan observed. I have an excellent therapist, Charlotte said with a smile, who I started seeing after that night in the blizzard, because having a near-death experience made me realize I wasn't actually living, just surviving. Sound familiar? Very, Evan said. Though I didn't start therapy until you suggested it. Insisted on it, really. Because you were running on empty and pretending you were fine, Charlotte reminded him, and I loved you too much to watch you burn out trying to be everything to everyone. Best decision I ever made, Evan said. After saying yes to the coffee that day you asked me to consult. After fixing my car that night, Charlotte corrected. That was the real first decision that led here. After choosing to have Lily, Evan countered. She's the reason I kept going long enough to reach that night, to fix that car, to meet you. After your parents taught you to be kind, Charlotte said. After Sarah showed you what love looked like. After every small choice that made you who you are. They could trace it back forever, Evan realized. Every moment built on previous moments. Every choice enabling future choices. But the bottom line was simpler. They'd found each other. They'd chosen each other. And they were building something together that honored both their pasts and their futures. I love you, Evan said, the words as natural as breathing. I love you too, Charlotte replied. And I'm proud of us. Of what we're building, not just in business, but in life. The family we've created, the kids we're going to help, the example we're setting. No pressure, Evan said with a slight laugh. No pressure, Charlotte agreed. Just purpose, which is different. As they finally headed to bed, Evan paused at Lily's door, pushing it open slightly to check on her. She was sprawled across her bed the way only 12-year-olds could manage, taking up far more space than seemed physically possible, her face peaceful in sleep. This, Evan thought, this was what he'd survived for, not just to build a successful career or find love or prove bullies wrong, though all of those things mattered. But for this moment right here, standing in a doorway, watching his daughter sleep safely, knowing tomorrow would bring new challenges, but also new joys, new chances to make a difference, new opportunities to choose kindness. Blake Cunningham had tried to teach him that struggle made you worthless, that weakness was permanent, that people like Evan would always be losers. But Blake had been wrong. Struggle had made Evan stronger. Weakness had taught him empathy. And the person Blake had dismissed as a loser had built a life rich in ways Blake would never understand. Not because of the money, not because of the success, but because Evan had learned to measure his worth by how he treated others, by what he built rather than what he destroyed, by the love he gave and received rather than the pain he inflicted or endured. As he closed Lily's door and joined Charlotte in their bedroom, Evan felt something settle in his chest, a profound sense of rightness, of being exactly where he was meant to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do. The reunion had been meant as his humiliation. Instead, it had become his liberation, the final proof that he'd not just survived, but truly, impossibly, thrived. And tomorrow, he'd wake up and do it all again. Not because he had something to prove, but because he had something to give. And that made all the difference. 3 weeks after the community center talk, Evan received an email that stopped him mid-sip of his morning coffee. The subject line read simply, "I need to apologize properly." The sender was Blake Cunningham. Evan stared at the message for a long moment before opening it, his finger hovering over the delete button. Part of him wanted nothing more to do with Blake, wanted to leave that chapter closed and move forward. But curiosity won out, and he clicked. The email was longer than he'd expected, several paragraphs of text that appeared to have been written and rewritten multiple times based on the timestamps and the metadata. Evan read it slowly, Charlotte reading over his shoulder as she refilled his coffee. "Evan, I know you have no reason to read this, let alone respond to it. I know I don't deserve your time or attention after everything I put you through, both in high school and at the reunion. But I'm asking anyway because I need you to know some things, and I need to say them when I'm not surrounded by people and ego and all the defense mechanisms I use to avoid being real. I've been going to therapy since the reunion. My wife Tessa insisted, said she couldn't watch me destroy myself with anger and insecurity anymore. At first I resented it, thought it was stupid, that I was fine and everyone else was the problem. But my therapist had me watch the videos from that night, made me watch my own face as you and Charlotte told your story, made me see what everyone else saw. A small, cruel man trying to make someone else smaller to feel big. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done, seeing myself that clearly. Realizing that I'd built my entire identity around being better than other people. And that when you showed up successful and happy, it shattered the narrative I'd been telling myself for years. The narrative that said I was special, that I deserved everything I had because I was somehow superior. My therapist asked me why I targeted you specifically in high school. I gave all the surface answers. You were an easy target. You were different. Everyone else was doing it. But she kept pushing until I admitted the truth. I was jealous. You had lost everything, your dad, your stability, your future plans. And you were still kind, still decent, still trying. And I couldn't stand it because I knew, somewhere deep down, that if I lost everything, I'd crumble. I'd have nothing left because there was nothing underneath the privilege and the performance. So I tried to break you, tried to prove that your kindness was weakness, that your struggle made you worthless, that you were less than me in every way that mattered. And when you wouldn't break, when you kept showing up and doing your best despite everything I threw at you, I hated you even more. Because you were proving me wrong just by existing. The reunion was supposed to be my final victory, my proof that I was right, that you'd peaked in high school and never amounted to anything. Instead, it became the moment I had to face what I'd become, someone who needed other people to fail so I could feel successful. Someone whose happiness was dependent on others being unhappy. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even know if I deserve forgiveness. But I needed you to know that I see it now. I see what I did, why I did it, and how wrong I was. And I'm trying to be better. For my kids, for my wife, for myself. I'm trying to learn what you already knew. That real strength isn't about making others feel small. It's about lifting them up even when you're struggling yourself. Thank you for not humiliating me that night, even though you had every right to. Thank you for being gracious when I deserved cruelty. And thank you for showing me through your example that it's never too late to choose to be better. Blake Evans set down his coffee, his hands not quite steady. Charlotte's hand found his shoulder, a warm, grounding presence. "What are you thinking?" she asked softly. "I'm thinking that's the most honest thing Blake Cunningham has probably ever said to anyone," Evan replied. "I'm also thinking I have no idea how to respond to it." "Do you want to respond?" Charlotte asked. "You don't have to. You can acknowledge his growth without engaging with it directly." "I know," Evan said, "but I keep thinking about those kids at the community center, about how we told them that people can change, that pain doesn't have to be permanent. If I believe that for them, shouldn't I believe it for Blake too?" Believing people can change is different from being responsible for their change, Charlotte pointed out. You can acknowledge his apology without taking on the burden of his redemption. Evan nodded slowly, turning the idea over in his mind. She was right, of course. Blake's growth was Blake's responsibility, not his. But there was something in the email that resonated. The raw honesty, the willingness to be vulnerable, the recognition of harm done. Those things deserved acknowledgement, even if they didn't require forgiveness. He spent the morning drafting a response, writing and deleting and writing again until he found words that felt true. Blake, thank you for your honesty. I know how hard it is to look at yourself clearly and not like what you see. The fact that you're trying to be better matters, not to erase what happened, but to create something different going forward. I accept your apology, though I won't lie and say the years of bullying didn't hurt or that I'm completely past it. But I also recognize that you are dealing with your own issues, your own insecurities. That doesn't excuse what you did, but it does help me understand it. I hope therapy helps you find the peace you're looking for. And I hope your kids grow up seeing a father who's willing to admit when he's wrong and do the work to be better. That's a gift not every child gets. I wish you well, Blake. Genuinely. Not because you deserve it or earned it, but because I choose not to carry anger anymore. It's too heavy, and I have better things to do with my energy. Take care of yourself, Evan. He sent it before he could second-guess himself, then closed his laptop and took a deep breath. Charlotte had been right. He didn't have to forgive or forget or make everything okay. But he could acknowledge growth when he saw it, and then move on with his own life. The scholarship fund was taking shape faster than either of them had anticipated. Vailtech's board had enthusiastically approved the initiative, seeing both the corporate social responsibility angle and the potential pipeline for talented employees. They'd named it the Sarah Carter Memorial Scholarship, honoring both Evan's late wife and the values she'd embodied: compassion, resilience, and unwavering belief in human potential. Lily had insisted on being involved in every aspect, from reviewing applications to planning events. She approached it with the same fierce dedication she brought to everything, spending hours after school researching best practices for youth mentorship programs and drafting proposals for how they could expand their impact. "We should do more than just money," she announced one evening at dinner, her notebook open beside her plate. Like, money is great and necessary, but these kids also need mentors, therapy access, life skills training, networking opportunities. They need a whole support system, not just tuition checks. "That's very insightful," Charlotte said, genuinely impressed. "What brought you to that conclusion?" "I was reading about foster care outcomes," Lily said, as casually as if she'd been reading about celebrities or sports. "And a lot of kids who age out struggle not because they're not smart or capable, but because they don't have anyone to teach them basic stuff. Like how to file taxes or negotiate a salary, or even how to grocery shop efficiently. They missed out on all the informal education most kids get from parents." "So you're thinking we should provide that kind of practical support too," Evan said, following her logic. "Exactly," Lily confirmed. "Maybe we could pair each scholarship recipient with a mentor from Vailtech who helps them navigate not just the academic stuff, but the life stuff. Someone they can call when they don't know how to read a lease, or they're scared to ask for help in class, or they just need someone to believe in them." "I love this," Charlotte said, "and I think we should put you on the scholarship committee." "Officially. Your perspective matters, and you clearly have ideas worth implementing." Lily's face lit up with a smile so bright it could have powered the city. "Really? You're not just saying that to be nice?" "I never just say things to be nice," Charlotte replied with mock seriousness. "I say things because they're true and strategically sound. Your ideas are both." Over the following weeks, Lily threw herself into the project with the intensity of someone who'd found their calling. She attended planning meetings, contributed to policy discussions, and even interviewed potential scholarship recipients with a combination of empathy and directness that reminded Evan so much of Sarah it sometimes hurt to watch. The first scholarship recipient was a 17-year-old named Marcus, not Blake's old friend Marcus, but a quieter, more serious Marcus who'd been bouncing between foster homes since he was 9. He wanted to study mechanical engineering, had taught himself calculus from library books, and worked 30 hours a week at a fast food restaurant to save money for a future he wasn't sure he'd ever reach. Evan met him for coffee on a Saturday afternoon, just the two of them, no formal interview or evaluation. Just two people who'd both known what it meant to struggle, to fight for every inch of progress, to wonder if survival was all life would ever offer. "I read about you," Marcus said, stirring sugar into his coffee with hands that were rough and scarred from years of work. "About the reunion and everything. People at my school were talking about it." "What were they saying?" Evan asked, curious despite himself. "That it was inspiring," Marcus replied, "that it gave them hope things could get better. But honestly," he looked up, meeting Evan's eyes, "I was more interested in what you did before the success. The 3 jobs, the baby, the barely surviving part. Because that's where I am now, and I need to know it's possible to get through it." "It's possible," Evan said firmly. "It's hard as hell, and there will be days you want to quit, but it's possible. Tell me about your situation. What are you dealing with right now?" Marcus talked for the next hour about aging out of foster care in 6 months, about his fears of homelessness, about the dreams he had that seemed impossibly distant. Evan listened without interrupting, recognizing so much of his younger self in this kid's story. The exhaustion, the determination, the terror barely held at bay. "Here's what I can tell you," Evan said when Marcus finally ran out of words. "The scholarship covers tuition, housing, books, and a monthly stipend for living expenses. You'll have a mentor, me if you want, or someone else from Vail Tech if you'd prefer. You'll have access to therapy, career counseling, and a network of people who want to see you succeed. This isn't charity. This is investment in someone we believe has potential." "Why me?" Marcus asked, his voice cracking slightly. "There are probably dozens of kids who applied, kids with better grades or more impressive stories. Why would you pick me?" "Your essay," Evan said simply. "You wrote about fixing your foster mom's car when you were 14. You taught yourself from YouTube videos because she couldn't afford a mechanic, and you knew she needed that car to get to work. That's problem solving, compassion, and initiative all wrapped up in one act. That's exactly the kind of person we want to support." Marcus's eyes filled with tears he was clearly trying to control. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll let us help," Evan replied. "Say you'll show up to class and ask for support when you need it, and believe that you deserve this opportunity. That's all we ask." "I can do that," Marcus said, his voice steadier now. "I can definitely do that." As they parted ways, Marcus hesitated, then stuck out his hand. "Thank you, Mr. Carter, for seeing me, for believing in me, for proving that making it through the hard part is possible." "Call me Evan," Evan said, shaking his hand firmly. "And Marcus, you're going to do more than make it through. You're going to thrive, I can already tell." Watching Marcus walk away, shoulders a little straighter than they'd been an hour ago, Evan felt something shift inside him. This was the real victory, he realized. Not the Rolls-Royce or the successful career or even proving Blake wrong. It was this, the ability to reach back and help someone else climb the same cliff he'd barely survived scaling himself. That evening, the house was chaotic in the best way. Lily had invited 2 friends over for a study group that had devolved into a debate about whether artificial intelligence would eventually replace human creativity. Charlotte was on a conference call in her office, her measured tones occasionally rising with passion when someone questioned her strategy. And Evan was in the kitchen, making dinner for everyone and listening to Lily's argument about how AI could enhance but never replace human intuition. "Dad, tell them," Lily called out. "Your diagnostic AI doesn't replace mechanics, right? It just makes them better at their jobs." "That's the theory," Evan confirmed, stirring pasta sauce. "Though I think the question is more nuanced than either side is acknowledging. AI will change almost every job, including creative ones. But change doesn't necessarily mean replacement. It means evolution." "Thank you," Lily crowed. "That's exactly what I was trying to say." Her friend Emma, a sharp-eyed girl with impressive debate skills, wasn't ready to concede. "But if AI can do something faster and cheaper, why would anyone pay a human to do it? Companies care about profit, not preserving jobs for philosophical reasons." "Because humans provide something AI can't," Evan replied, coming to lean against the doorframe. "Context, empathy, the ability to recognize what's needed versus what's requested. The best solutions come from understanding not just the technical problem, but the human problem underneath it." "Like when you helped Marcus today?" Lily asked. You didn't just give him money for school, you saw what he actually needed, someone to believe in him. Exactly, Evan said. That's a very human skill, reading between the lines, understanding unspoken needs, connecting on an emotional level. AI can process data, but it can't truly care about outcomes beyond parameters we program. Charlotte emerged from her office, looking tired but satisfied. Did I just hear my brilliant boyfriend waxing philosophical about artificial intelligence and human connection? You did, Evan confirmed. Want some pasta? I made enough to feed a small army. Perfect, because I'm hungry enough to be a small army, Charlotte said, kissing him quickly before greeting Lily's friends. Dinner was cheerfully chaotic, with conversations flowing between school gossip, business strategy, college plans, and a surprisingly heated debate about whether pineapple belonged on pizza. Evan watched his family, because that's what they were, even if the configuration was unconventional, and felt a profound gratitude that sometimes still surprised him with its intensity. This was what he'd been surviving for all those years. Not knowing it would look like this specifically, but knowing that somewhere ahead, if he could just keep going, there was the possibility of joy, of belonging, of love that felt safe instead of terrifying. After Lily's friends left and she'd gone to bed, Evan and Charlotte cleaned up the kitchen together, moving in the comfortable synchronization of people who'd learned each other's rhythms. Blake emailed me back, Evan said, loading plates into the dishwasher. Thanked me for responding. Said he'd like to meet for coffee sometime. No pressure, just to talk. How do you feel about that? Charlotte asked, wiping down the counter. Cautiously open, Evan admitted. I don't want to be his therapist or his absolution, but I also think there's something to be said for giving people room to grow, even people who hurt us. That's very evolved of you, Charlotte observed, though I reserve the right to be less evolved and still want to punch him sometimes. Noted, Evan said with a smile. Your protective instincts are one of the things I love most about you. One of, Charlotte challenged. Please tell me the complete list of things you love about me, ranked in order of importance. That would take all night, Evan said, pulling her close. And I have much better ideas for how to spend our evening. Oh, Charlotte's smile turned mischievous. Do tell. Well, there's that documentary about supply chain innovation you wanted to watch, Evan teased. You know how to sweet-talk a woman, Charlotte deadpanned. They ended up on the couch with the documentary playing, but mostly ignored, talking instead about Marcus, about the scholarship fund, about Lily's growing maturity, and how quickly she was approaching the age where she'd start thinking about colleges and independence. Does it scare you? Charlotte asked. How fast she's growing up. Terrifies me, Evan admitted. I remember when she was a baby, so small I was afraid I'd break her. And now she's almost as tall as you, arguing about AI ethics and interviewing scholarship candidates. Where did the time go? Into building this life, Charlotte said softly. Into creating something worth having. The time didn't disappear, Evan. It turned into this. I like this, Evan said. This is good. This is very good, Charlotte agreed. And it's about to get better because I have news. Evan sat up straighter, reading her expression. Good news or complicated news? Good news, Charlotte assured him. The board approved my proposal to expand internationally. We're opening offices in Berlin and Singapore, which means more jobs, more impact, more reach for everything we've built. That's amazing, Evan said. You've been working toward that for years. We've been working toward it, Charlotte corrected. Your innovations made it possible. The diagnostic AI, the supply chain optimization, all of it. This is our success, not just mine. Our success, Evan repeated, testing how it felt. Even after 2 years, he sometimes struggled to see himself as Charlotte's equal partner, rather than someone she'd rescued and elevated. Therapy was helping with that, but old beliefs died hard. I can hear you thinking, Charlotte said, hear you questioning whether you deserve credit. So let me be very clear, without you, Vailtech would have failed 5 years ago. With you, we're expanding globally. Those are facts, not opinions or charity, or anything other than recognition of your actual contributions. I know, Evan said, and mostly he did. Sorry, old habits. Don't apologize, Charlotte said. Just keep doing the work to believe what I already know.
that you're brilliant and talented and absolutely essential to everything we've built. They stayed up too late talking about the expansion, about what it would mean for their family, about whether they'd need to travel more or if Evan could manage the technical side remotely. Eventually, exhaustion won out and they headed to bed, but Evan found himself lying awake even as Charlotte's breathing deepened into sleep beside him. He was thinking about Marcus, about the look in the kid's eyes when he realized someone was offering not just money, but genuine belief in his potential. He was thinking about Blake's email and the vulnerability it took to admit you'd been wrong, to ask for a chance to be better. He was thinking about Lily growing up in a house where love was abundant and possibilities felt endless, so different from his own childhood shadowed by loss and scarcity. Most of all, he was thinking about that night in the blizzard, about the choice to stop instead of driving past. Such a small decision in the moment, help a stranger, refuse payment, go home to his daughter. But that choice had set in motion everything that followed, not because it was special or unique, but because it was consistent with who he'd chosen to be even when being kind cost him dearly. His phone buzzed with a text message, pulling him from his thoughts. It was from one of the kids he'd spoken to at the community center, the purple-haired girl who'd asked about ending it, whose name he'd learned was Jasmine. "Hey, Mr. Carter, I know it's late, but I wanted to tell you something. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about promising yourself one more day, and I've been doing that, just one more day, over and over. And tonight was the first night I didn't have to force myself to make that promise. Tonight, I actually wanted tomorrow to come. So thank you, for being honest, for making me feel less alone, for giving me a reason to keep trying." Evan felt his eyes burn with tears. He typed back carefully, aware of the weight this conversation carried. "Jasmine, thank you for telling me this. I'm so proud of you for choosing to stay, for doing the hard work of surviving until it started to feel like living. Keep going. Keep choosing one more day, and know that I'm here if you ever need someone to remind you why tomorrow matters." He set down his phone and stared at the ceiling, overwhelmed by the responsibility and privilege of being someone's reason to keep going. This was what mattered, he thought. Not wealth or success or proving bullies wrong, but this, being present for someone else's darkest moment and helping them find their way toward light. Charlotte stirred beside him, her hand finding his in the dark. "Can't sleep?" "Just thinking," Evan said, "about how strange and beautiful life is. How one choice in a blizzard led to all of this." "It wasn't just the blizzard," Charlotte murmured, still half asleep. "It was every choice before that. Every time you chose kindness over bitterness. Every time you showed up even when showing up felt impossible. The blizzard was just the moment those choices became visible." "I love you," Evan said softly. "Have I mentioned that recently?" "Not in the last 2 hours," Charlotte teased. "I was starting to worry." "I love you," he repeated, "and I'm grateful every single day that you broke down on that road, that I stopped, that you remembered me, that we found our way to each other." "Me too," Charlotte said, squeezing his hand. "Now, go to sleep. Tomorrow's a big day." "Why is tomorrow a big day?" Evan asked. "Because every day is a big day when you're building the kind of life worth living," Charlotte replied. "Now, sleep." Evan smiled in the darkness and closed his eyes, letting Charlotte's breathing and the quiet sounds of their house lull him toward rest. Tomorrow would indeed be a big day. Marcus would be submitting his enrollment paperwork, Lily had a debate competition, the scholarship committee was meeting to review more applications, and Evan had a presentation about the international expansion that could shape Vailtech's next decade. But more than any of that, tomorrow would be another day of this life he'd built from the ruins of grief and struggle. Another day of choosing kindness, of showing up, of being present for the people who needed him. Another day of proving that redemption wasn't a destination, but a practice. Something you did over and over until it became who you were. As sleep finally claimed him, Evan's last thought was of that younger version of himself standing in the park, exhausted and hopeless, unable to imagine a future that didn't hurt. If he could go back and tell that version of himself anything, it would be this: keep going, just one more day, and then another and another. Because impossibly, miraculously, beautifully, it does get better. Not easily, not quickly, but completely. The hard days don't disappear, but they become bearable. The grief doesn't vanish,
but it transforms into something you can carry without being crushed. And eventually, if you keep choosing kindness and keep showing up and keep believing that tomorrow might surprise you, you wake up one morning and realize you're not just surviving anymore. You're living, truly, fully, joyfully living. And that makes every struggle, every sacrifice, every moment of choosing to stay worth it. Every single one. 6 months had passed since the reunion, and spring was painting the city in shades of green and gold when Evan found himself standing in the community center again. This time, though, he wasn't there to speak to a small group of struggling teenagers. He was there for something bigger, something that had grown from those initial conversations into a full-fledged program that was already changing lives. The Sarah Carter Memorial Scholarship Foundation was officially launching with a gala fundraiser, though calling it a gala felt almost wrong given the venue. Instead of some fancy hotel ballroom, they'd chosen the community center where it had all started. The same scarred floors, the same hand-painted murals, the same sense of genuine purpose that no amount of crystal chandeliers could replicate. "You're fidgeting," Charlotte observed, smoothing his tie even though it didn't need smoothing. She looked stunning in a deep blue dress that managed to be both elegant and appropriate for the setting.
Nervous? Terrified, Evan admitted. What if nobody comes? What if we've built this whole thing and it doesn't actually help anyone? Evan. Charlotte took his face in her hands, making him look at her. We have 43 scholarship recipients already enrolled for fall semester. We have a waiting list of over 200 applicants. We have 17 corporations who've pledged matching donations. And we have a room full of people about to arrive who believe in what we're doing. Stop catastrophizing and trust that the work speaks for itself. Before Evan could respond, Lily appeared in a swirl of emerald fabric, her dress more sophisticated than he was comfortable with for a 12-year-old but age-appropriate according to both Charlotte and the saleswoman who'd helped pick it out.
"The caterers want to know where to put the dessert table," Lily announced. "And Marcus just arrived with 3 of his foster siblings and they're all adorable. And can we please add them to the scholarship list immediately?" "That's not how scholarship lists work," Evan said, but he was already smiling. "But yes, make sure we get their information. When they're old enough, we'll absolutely consider them." "You're such a softie," Lily teased. "It's one of your best qualities." People began arriving in a steady stream, Vail Tech employees who'd volunteered to mentor scholarship recipients, local business owners who donated to the fund, families from the community center, and several of the teenagers from that first talk 6 months ago. Jasmine was there, her purple hair now streaked with silver, wearing a dress and a cautious smile. The twins were there, looking healthier and more confident than they had before. Even the boy with the black eye, whose name Evan had learned was David, showed up with his mother, both of them clean and sober and trying. And then Blake Cunningham walked through the door with his wife Tessa, and Evan felt the room's energy shift as people recognized him from the viral videos. Evan hadn't invited Blake, hadn't expected him to come. But here he was, carrying a donation envelope and looking uncomfortable in a way that somehow made him more human than he'd ever seemed in high school. "I'll handle this," Charlotte murmured, moving to intercept, but Evan caught her hand. "It's okay," he said. "Let me talk to him." He crossed the room, aware of eyes tracking his movement, of the phones that were probably already recording. Blake saw him coming and straightened, his expression difficult to read. "Evan," Blake said, extending his hand. "Thank you for not having me thrown out." "Why would I do that?" Evan asked, shaking his hand. "You're here to support kids who need help. That's exactly the kind of person we want here." "I wasn't sure you'd see it that way," Blake admitted. "After everything, but I wanted to come anyway. Wanted to put my money where my apology was, I guess." He held out the envelope. "It's not much compared to what the corporations are giving, but it's what Tessa and I could manage." Evan took the envelope, feeling its weight. "Every donation matters, Blake. Thank you." "Can I—" Blake hesitated, glancing around the room. "Can I talk to you for a minute, privately?" They found a quiet corner near the stage, away from the growing crowd. Blake looked older than he had at the reunion, tired in a way that suggested he'd been doing hard internal work. "I've been following the foundation," Blake said. "Reading about the kids you're helping, watching the interviews you've done. And I keep thinking about what you said that night, that happy people don't need to make others feel small." "I remember," Evan said. "I wasn't happy," Blake continued. "I thought I was. Thought I had everything: money, status, the right wife, the right life. But I was miserable, Evan, absolutely miserable, because I'd built everything on a foundation of being better than other people, and that's not sustainable. There's always someone richer, more successful, more whatever. So I kept needing to tear people down to feel okay about myself. What changed? Evan asked. Therapy, mostly, Blake said with a wry smile. My therapist doesn't let me get away with anything, but also, he paused, choosing his words carefully. My son. He's 7 now, and I saw him making fun of another kid at school. Called him poor, said his clothes were ugly, and I realized he learned that from me, that I was teaching him to be cruel. That must have been hard to see, Evan said, and he meant it. Devastating, Blake agreed, because I don't want that for him. I don't want him to grow up thinking his worth comes from diminishing others. So I had to figure out how to be different, how to find value in building people up instead of tearing them down. He looked directly at Evan. That's why I'm here. Not just to donate money, but to learn. To see what it looks like to create something that matters, something that helps. Because I want to teach my son that. I need to teach my son that. Evan felt something loosen in his chest. The last piece of anger he'd been carrying finally released. Then stick around tonight. Watch what these kids can do when someone believes in them. That's the lesson worth learning. Can I ask you something? Blake said. How did you do it? How did you survive everything life threw at you and still stay kind? Most people would have become bitter, angry, cruel, but you didn't. How? Evan thought about the question, really considered it. I think it's because I knew what cruelty felt like, what it did to me. And I decided I never wanted to make someone else feel that way, no matter how much I was hurting. It wasn't easy. There were days I wanted to lash out, to make the world hurt as much as I was hurting. But I had Lily, and I kept thinking about what kind of father I wanted to be for her, what kind of man I wanted her to see me as. She's lucky to have you, Blake said quietly. I'm lucky to have her, Evan corrected. She saved me as much as I saved her, gave me a reason to keep going when I had no reasons left. Rebecca Torres appeared then, clipboard in hand and a warm smile on her face. Evan, we're ready to start whenever you are. I'll be right there, Evan promised. He turned back to Blake. Stay for the speeches. Some of the scholarship recipients are talking about what the program means to them. I think you'll find it illuminating. I will, Blake said. And Evan, thank you for not writing me off, for giving me space to be better. We're all trying to be better, Evan replied. That's the point of all of this. The program started with Rebecca welcoming everyone and explaining the mission of the foundation. Then Charlotte spoke about the importance of investing in young people who'd been overlooked by traditional systems, about how talent and potential existed everywhere, but opportunity did not. Her speech was eloquent and passionate, and Evan watched with pride as she commanded the room the way she commanded boardrooms, with intelligence, confidence, and genuine conviction. Then it was Evan's turn. He approached the microphone with notes he'd prepared but knew he wouldn't need. These weren't strangers he was addressing. They were people who'd become part of his community, his purpose, his reason for getting up every morning beyond just going to work. 10 years ago, Evan began, his voice carrying through the room, I was working 3 jobs and raising a baby alone and trying to figure out how to survive each day. I was so tired I could barely see straight. So broke I was choosing between diapers and electricity. So lonely, I sometimes forgot what it felt like to have a conversation that didn't involve asking for more hours or explaining why I needed an advance on my paycheck. The room was silent, attentive. Even the catering staff had stopped moving to listen. I was also being told constantly that I was worthless, that my struggles were my own fault, that if I was poor and alone and barely surviving, it was because I deserved to be. And I almost believed it. Almost let that narrative define me. He paused, looking out at faces he'd come to know over the past months. But I didn't. And the reason I didn't is because of 3 things. My daughter Lily, who needed me to be more than my circumstances. My late wife Sarah, whose memory reminded me that kindness matters even when it's hard. And strangers who showed me compassion when they didn't have to. My old boss Tom, who kept me employed when I was barely functional. Mrs. Chen, my neighbor, who babysat Lily for free when I was desperate. The dispatcher who covered my shifts when Lily was sick. He saw people nodding, recognizing themselves, or people they knew in his story. This foundation exists because I understand what it means to need help and to be too proud or too scared or too ashamed to ask for it. It exists because I know that potential is everywhere, but resources are not. And it exists because we believe, that everyone deserves a chance to build a life worth living, regardless of where they started. Marcus stood then, moving to join Evan at the front. They'd planned this, but Evan still felt his throat tighten seeing the transformation in the young man since their first meeting. Marcus was enrolled at the State University now, studying mechanical engineering, living in campus housing for the first time in his life. He'd gained weight in the good way, his face fuller and healthier. His eyes, which had been so guarded and afraid, now held confidence and hope. 6 months ago, Marcus said, his voice steady despite his obvious nervousness, I was pretty sure I was going to end up homeless. I was aging out of foster care, working full-time just to save enough for maybe community college, and trying not to think too hard about my future because thinking about it was terrifying. He glanced at Evan. And then this guy bought me coffee and told me I had potential, told me someone wanted to invest in me, and I didn't believe him at first. I thought it was too good to be true, that there had to be a catch. But there was no catch, Marcus continued, just people who genuinely wanted to help, who saw me as more than a foster kid or a statistic or a charity case, who treated me like I had value, like I deserved to take up space, like my dreams mattered. His voice cracked slightly. You guys gave me more than tuition money. You gave me permission to hope, to believe that maybe my life could be different than my circumstances suggested. And that's everything. The room erupted in applause, and Evan saw more than a few people wiping their eyes. Marcus returned to his seat and Jasmine stood, making her way to the front without being prompted. This hadn't been planned, but Rebecca nodded encouragement. I'm Jasmine, she said, her voice quiet but clear. I was at the community center talk 6 months ago. I was the one who asked Mr. Carter if he'd ever thought about ending it, if it ever got so bad he wanted to quit. The room went very still, the weight of what she was saying settling over everyone. He told me the truth, Jasmine continued. He said yes, he had thought about it, and he told me about promising himself one more day, over and over, until the days started to feel less impossible. And I've been doing that, just one more day, and some days are still really hard. Some days I still have to force myself to make that promise. But some days, more days now, I actually want tomorrow to come. I want to see what happens next. She looked directly at Evan, tears streaming down her face, but her voice never wavering. You told me that survival is success, that getting through another day when every day feels impossible is winning. And I'm still here. I'm still fighting. And that's because you made me feel like fighting was worth it, like I was worth it. Evan was openly crying now, not bothering to hide it. Charlotte's hand found his, squeezing tight, and when Jasmine finished speaking and returned to her seat, at least half the room was crying with him. Rebecca returned to the microphone, her own eyes damp. We're going to take a short break before dinner. Please mingle, meet our scholarship recipients, learn about the program, and thank you all of you for being here and supporting this work. The room dissolved into conversation and movement, but Evan found himself surrounded almost immediately by scholarship recipients and community center kids, all wanting to thank him, to share their stories, to tell him what the foundation meant to them. He listened to each one, hugged them when they needed hugging, and felt the weight of their trust like both a burden and a blessing. Eventually, he managed to break away, finding Charlotte and Lily near the dessert table. Lily launched herself at him, wrapping her arms around his waist. Dad, you made everyone cry, she said, her voice muffled against his chest. In a good way. You made them cry in a good way. I know, baby, Evan said, kissing the top of her head. Sometimes the best things make us cry. I'm proud of you, Lily said, pulling back to look up at him. And I'm proud to be your daughter. And I'm proud that Mom Sarah married you and made me, because even though I never met her, she gave me the best dad in the world. Evan's composure, which had been barely holding, completely shattered. He pulled Lily close again, letting the tears fall, feeling Charlotte's arms wrap around both of them. We're proud of you too, Charlotte murmured. Both of us. So incredibly proud. They stood like that for a long moment, a family unit bound not by biology alone, but by choice and commitment and love that had been tested and proven true. When they finally separated, Evan saw Blake watching from across the room, his expression unreadable. But then Blake raised his glass in a small salute. Acknowledgement, perhaps, or respect, or simply recognition of what Evan had built from the ashes of the life Blake had tried to destroy. Evan raised his own glass in return. Not forgiveness exactly, not erasure of the past, but acknowledgement that people could change, could grow, could choose to be better than their worst moments. And sometimes that was enough. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of conversations and connections. Tom Morrison showed up, bringing several of his mechanics who wanted to donate their time to teaching automotive skills to scholarship recipients. Mrs. Chen arrived with enough home-cooked food to feed everyone twice over, refusing to let anyone reimburse her. Sarah Brennan from high school appeared with her husband, both of them writing substantial checks and asking how they could volunteer. As the crowd began to thin and the cleanup started, Evan found himself on the community center's back patio, looking up at the stars. He was exhausted in the best way, drained from so much emotion, but filled up at the same time with a sense of rightness, of purpose, of having done something that mattered. "There you are," Charlotte said, stepping out to join him. "People are asking for you." "Let them wait," Evan said, pulling her close. "I need a minute with just you." They stood together in the cool evening air, the sounds of the party winding down, floating through the open door behind them. Somewhere inside, Lily was helping Marcus's foster siblings with the dessert they'd smuggled from the table. Tom was telling war stories about Evan's early days at the garage, and Rebecca was already making plans to expand the program to serve twice as many kids next year. "We did this," Charlotte said softly. "We actually did this." "You did this," Evan corrected. "You had the resources, the platform, the credibility. I just had the story." "No," Charlotte said firmly, turning to face him. "We did this together. Your story gave it heart. My resources gave it reach. But neither one of us could have built this alone. That's what makes it powerful. It's a testament to what's possible when people work together instead of competing or tearing each other down." "When did you get so wise?" Evan teased. "I've always been wise," Charlotte replied with mock indignation. "You just finally started listening." "Fair point," Evan conceded. "So what's next? World domination? Solving climate change? Teaching Blake's kids to be decent humans?" "All of the above," Charlotte said. "But first, I have something for you." She pulled a small box from her clutch, and Evan's heart started hammering. They'd talked about marriage, about making their commitment official, but always in the abstract future tense. Not now, not yet, not while there were so many other things demanding their attention. "Charlotte," he started, but she pressed a finger to his lips. "Let me do this," she said. "I had a whole speech planned, but looking at you right now, exhausted and happy and covered in the lipstick marks of teenagers who hugged you, I'm just going to say it simply. Evan Carter, you are the best man I've ever known. You're the best partner, the best father to Lily, the best example of what it means to be human. And I want to spend the rest of my life building things with you. Beautiful, meaningful, important things. I want to wake up next to you when we're 70 and still be amazed that I get to be with you." She opened the box to reveal a simple platinum band. "Will you marry me?" Evan stared at the ring, then at Charlotte, then back at the ring. "You're proposing to me?" "Someone had to," Charlotte said with a slight smile. "You kept saying you wanted to do it right, wanted to plan something special. But Evan, every day with you is special. Every moment is right. So yes, I'm proposing to you. What do you say?" "Yes," Evan said, his voice cracking. "God, yes. Absolutely yes." Charlotte slipped the ring onto his finger, and Evan pulled her into a kiss that was witnessed by Lily, who'd been watching from the doorway and now let out a squeal that brought everyone running. "They're engaged!" Lily shrieked. "Dad and Mom C are getting married!" The remaining crowd erupted in cheers and applause, and suddenly Evan was being hugged and congratulated and peppered with questions about dates and venues and whether Lily could be the maid of honor. "Can I?" Lily asked, bouncing with excitement. "Please, please, please. I promise I'll take it super seriously and help with all the planning, and I won't make it about me, even though I really want to wear a fancy dress." "Of course you can," Charlotte said, pulling Lily into their embrace. "I wouldn't want anyone else." Blake appeared then,
Tessa beside him, and extended his hand to Evan. Congratulations, you deserve this. All of this. Thank you, Evan said, shaking his hand. That means something, Blake, really. I hope so, Blake replied, and I hope... He paused, glancing at Tessa, who nodded encouragement. I hope you'll let me stay involved with the foundation, not in a leadership role or anything, but volunteering, mentoring, whatever you need. I want my kids to see me doing this kind of work. Want them to understand that success isn't about what you have, but what you give. We can always use more mentors, Charlotte said, especially ones who understand what it means to grow and change. As Blake and Tessa walked away, Evan felt Charlotte's hand in his, and Lily pressed against his side and thought about the journey that had brought him here. From that dark apartment where he'd barely survived each day, to the blizzard where he'd saved a stranger, to the reunion that was meant to humiliate him, to this moment surrounded by people whose lives he'd touched and who'd touched his in return. What are you thinking about? Charlotte asked. About how none of this was in my plan, Evan said. 10 years ago, if you'd told me this would be my life, you, Lily, thriving, this foundation, Blake, actually trying to be better, I'd have thought you were cruel for lying. The future seemed like just endless struggle. But you kept going anyway, Lily said, even when you didn't believe it would get better. I kept going because of you, Evan replied, kissing her forehead. You were my reason when I had no other reasons. And now? Lily asked. Now I have so many reasons I can't count them all, Evan said, looking between his daughter and his fiancée. You two, obviously, the kids we're helping through the foundation, the work at Vale Tech, the life we're building together. Every day gives me new reasons to be grateful I survived the hard years. Marcus approached then, one of his foster siblings in tow. Mr. Carter, this is Emma. She's 14 and she wants to be an engineer like you. Can you tell her it's possible? Evan knelt down to Emma's level, seeing in her eyes the same combination of hope and fear he'd carried for so many years. It's not just possible, he told her. It's probable, if you want it badly enough to work for it. And when you're ready, when you're old enough, this foundation will be here to help you. That's a promise. Really? Emma asked, her voice small. Really? Evan confirmed. I survived impossible things to get here. You can too, and you won't have to do it alone like I did. You'll have people helping you, believing in you, making sure you have what you need to succeed. Emma threw her arms around his neck in a fierce hug, and Evan closed his eyes, remembering all the times he'd needed someone to believe in him and had no one. Remembering the crushing loneliness of fighting battles no one acknowledged or understood. Remembering the bone-deep exhaustion of surviving without any guarantee it would ever become living. This was why he'd kept going, not for this specific moment, but for the possibility of moments like this. For the chance to be for someone else what he'd needed and rarely found. For the opportunity to turn his pain into purpose and his struggles into scaffolding that others could climb. As the evening finally wound down and people began to leave, Evan stood with Charlotte and Lily, watching the community center empty. Tomorrow, the work would continue. There would be more scholarship applications to review, more kids to mentor, more systems to build. The international expansion of Vale Tech would demand his attention. Wedding planning would begin in earnest, with Lily already making lists of ideas. But tonight, he just stood there, feeling the weight of Charlotte's ring on his finger and Lily's hand in his, and let himself fully absorb the magnitude of how far he'd come. From the boy who'd lost his father too young and his wife too soon. From the young man who'd been mocked and dismissed and written off. From the exhausted father who'd worked himself to the bone and still barely scraped by. From the person who'd stood in a blizzard with bleeding hands, fixing a stranger's car because it was the right thing to do. To this, to surrounded by love and purpose and the knowledge that his existence made things better, not worse. To engage to a woman who saw him clearly and loved him anyway. To father of a daughter who was growing into someone he admired as much as he adored. To founder of a program that would help hundreds, maybe thousands of young people build lives worth living. Ready to go home? Charlotte asked, her voice soft with understanding that he needed this moment of reflection. Yeah, Evan said, taking one last look at the community center where so much had begun and changed. Let's go home. They drove through the quiet city streets, Lily dozing in the back seat, her head against the window.
Charlotte's hand found Evan's over the center console, their fingers intertwining with the ease of long practice. "I love you," Charlotte said, not for the first time that day, but with no less sincerity for the repetition. "I love you too," Evan replied. "Thank you for seeing me, for believing in me, for choosing me." "Thank you for stopping that night," Charlotte countered, "for being the kind of man who stops, for being exactly who you are, not who circumstances tried to make you." At home, they tucked Lily into bed together, both of them taking a moment to watch her sleep. Tomorrow, she'd wake up to the news that her parents were getting married, that her unconventional family was becoming official in the eyes of the world. But for now, she was just their daughter, safe and loved and dreaming of whatever 12-year-olds dreamed about. In their own bedroom, as Evan was getting ready for sleep, he caught sight of himself in the mirror. Same face he'd always had, though weathered now in different ways, laugh lines instead of stress lines. The kind of tiredness that came from a full life rather than an empty one. He looked at the ring on his finger, still getting used to its presence. "What are you thinking about now?" Charlotte asked from the bed, where she was already under the covers. "About Blake's question," Evan said. "About how I stayed kind despite everything, and I think I finally have the real answer." "What is it?" Charlotte asked. "I stayed kind because being cruel would have meant they won," Evan said slowly, working through the thought. "All the people who said I was worthless, who treated me like I didn't matter, if I'd let that turn me bitter and mean, then they'd have been right. They'd have broken something essential in me, and I refused to let them have that power." He turned to face Charlotte fully. "But more than that, I stayed kind because Sarah taught me that how you treat people when you're struggling tells you who you really are. And I wanted to be someone she'd be proud of, someone Lily could look up to, someone who proved that pain doesn't have to make you painful." "And you did," Charlotte said softly. "You proved that every single day. You still prove it." Evan climbed into bed beside her, and they lay facing each other in the dim light filtering through the curtains. Outside, the city hummed with its endless life, people sleeping and waking, struggling and succeeding, breaking and healing. Tomorrow, Evan would be part of that rhythm again, contributing his small piece to the enormous tapestry of human experience. But tonight, in this moment, he was exactly where he needed to be, with the woman he loved in a home they'd built together, with a daughter sleeping safely down the hall and a future stretching ahead that looked nothing like the bleak landscape he'd once imagined. "You know what the best part is?" Evan said, his voice drowsy with impending sleep. "What's that?" Charlotte asked. "This isn't the ending," Evan said. "This is just the middle. We have so much more life ahead of us, so many more kids to help, so many more moments to share, so many more reasons to be grateful we kept going when going seemed impossible." "That is the best part," Charlotte agreed, "though I'm also partial to the part where we get to do it together." "Together," Evan echoed, pulling her close. "Always together." As sleep finally claimed them both, Evan's last conscious thought was of something Lily had said earlier, that he'd made everyone cry in a good way. And he realized that was perhaps the highest compliment anyone had ever given him. To move people not through cruelty or manipulation, but through genuine emotion, through shared humanity, through the simple act of being honest about the hard parts and the hope that existed alongside them. Years from now, when the Scholarship Foundation had helped thousands of students, when Lily was grown and building her own life, when he and Charlotte were old and looking back on everything they'd accomplished together, he knew this night would stand out. Not because of the engagement, though that mattered. Not because of the successful launch, though that mattered too. But because of the moment when Jasmine had stood up and said he'd made her want to see tomorrow. When Marcus had called him more than a mentor but a proof of possibility. When kids who'd been told they were worthless had looked at him and seen someone who'd believed the same lie and survived to prove it false. That was the real victory. Not the Rolls-Royce or the career success or even the love he'd found, but the ability to take his pain and transform it into something that eased someone else's burden. To turn his struggle into a scaffold others could climb. To prove that kindness in the face of cruelty wasn't weakness, but the strongest thing a person could choose. Blake had tried to teach him that vulnerability meant defeat, that struggle indicated failure, that being different made you less than. But Blake had been wrong about all of it. Vulnerability was courage. Struggle was growth.
And being different, being the kind of person who stopped in blizzards and refused to let pain make him cruel, that was what made life worth living. The reunion had been meant as Evan's humiliation. Instead, it had become a catalyst for something far more important, a reminder that redemption wasn't about proving your worth to the people who doubted you. It was about proving it to yourself, about choosing every single day to be better than your circumstances, kinder than your pain, more hopeful than your past. And as Evan drifted towards sleep with Charlotte's heartbeat steady against his chest, and the knowledge that Lily was safe down the hall, and that tomorrow would bring new chances to make a difference, he felt it. The thing he'd been chasing through all those desperate years, the thing that had seemed impossible when he was working 3 jobs and wondering if survival was all life would ever offer. Peace. Not the absence of struggle, but the presence of purpose. Not the ending of hard days, but the knowledge that hard days were survivable and that on the other side of them waited moments worth the fight. He'd made it. Not despite the struggle, but because of it. Not in spite of the pain, but informed by it. Not by leaving his past behind, but by transforming it into something that could light the way for others. And that, finally, impossibly, beautifully, was enough. More than enough. Everything.